Okie doke, right. I've given a little plan for tonight. First of all, I'm going to tell you all about me, an overview of my operation, what happens and when, which I've divided into two parts of the year. So you can have an idea of what happens in the spring and the summer, because they are two specific times, as a lot of people in the UK would appreciate as well. And then I'm going to show you my honey production. And then I'm going to do quite a big chunk of queen rearing. And that's after that is when we'll have the break, because I feel that you'll all be pretty weary after that amount of time having queens rammed down your throat. But it'll be enjoyable, and it's quite technical, but I do believe it's important. Fundamentally, if you're going to learn queen rearing, you've got to understand the fundamental points of it. So on we go. So I've just got a little video I'll just play there. Hopefully you can all see that. It's a good introduction. Obviously, that's just queen cells that I raise. I have this in my YouTube video often at the end. It's just an overview of what I do. I use the nukes to make nucleus colonies. I have mini plus colonies in the bottom left-hand side here, and also I have production hives, as we just said, that give me my main crop of honey. So about me, I'm 49 years old. I was born and grew up in Jersey, Channel Islands. I went to the UK and studied horticulture at Hadlow College in Kent. And then I came back and joined the ambulance service because I realised that it wasn't for me at the time, even though it was a good vocation. And then I qualified as a paramedic in 1999, and then I moved to France in 2002. So I kind of trained, retrained, and threw all that away, and then came back and ended up in France. I was married at the time. We got 3 children. I worked as a landscape gardener because the way the French system works, it allows you to use your qualifications you've done European-wise and get your certificate to work. So I was able to work as a landscape gardener. And that meant that I was what they call pluriactive in France, which means you can have more than one job, providing you declare it all. I mean, we all declare everything in France. So I then became a professional beekeeper in 2019. And I got my first hives in, which is obviously a strange way of saying it, but I actually got my first 3 hives in 2009 and then became professional in 2019. So all that time it took me to build up and well, I was basically hooked like everyone else gets, and I got more and more hives, and it just worked out so that it was better for me to become professional. But the interesting thing is I've only just given up my last remaining job. As a landscape gardener and what we call a paysagiste in France, I worked for clients who had houses in Jersey and England. And the wonderful thing was, I didn't have to leave any of them. None of them sacked me.
Noel.
We had natural, what we call natural wastage. And as I naturally left these clients, then I was able to just concentrate more and more on bees each time. So that's kind of how it evolved. And now I'm living here in this beautiful house in Brittany, this is the classic Brittany house where we are. You can actually see here, I do barn owls. I've got a big barn owl box at the end of my house there, which is populated by 2 lovely barn owls. And I've got 3 smashing kids who are at the moment going through the start of university, the end of schooling, all that kind of thing. So we're very busy. And this is where I live. My house is right underneath that pin, and we have valley all around us. And we're actually quite high up here, but it's fine for my bees. I have an apiary here. I have another one up here, and I have another one just about there. So I have bees everywhere, but obviously I'll tell you more about that in a second, but this is a really good place for me because there's huge prolific diversity in pollens here. And my main village I'm actually attached to is Courcelles. It's an old Roman Gallo village, which is interesting because we've got a set of ruins and there's a museum and things like that. I'm just giving you an overview because when we go to the heavy queen rearing after, you're thinking, I wish I'd paid more attention to the ruins. But here we are. This is kind of where I have my apiaries. In this kind of pattern here. It's very difficult to say specifically because the map isn't that good, but I have 14 non-migratory, which means my hives do not move. They do not go anywhere, and they're all within 3 kilometers or more of each other. Now that's good and bad because 3 kilometers means I'm away from, or I'm in less risk of contaminating another apiary if I get a disease outbreak, but I'm not too far to travel between each apiary when I'm doing my rounds. And that's a very important factor. And here you go, that's some relation to where I am in terms of the UK. So a lot of people who are living in England will be able to relate to that. So there you go. We are obviously very much like Cornwall, but we're hugely influenced by the English Channel in terms of our weather. We generally don't have much snow. We maybe have once every 5-6 years. We do have frosts, but we don't have much cold weather, only when the UK get it and when Europe gets that cold from Russia. So we're pretty well protected most of the year. In fact, we're not really cold enough. I would actually prefer it to be colder in the winter for my bees. As I was saying, we get a fantastic diversity in pollens. This was taken, interestingly, about mid-May, when the oilseed rape was just finishing flowering. But I like this photo because it shows the diversity in pollens at a time when this actual pollen trap was right next to a field of oilseed rape. And it shows that they weren't interested in the oilseed rape, they're more interested in all the other flowers around. So it's a really good thing. So I'm just gonna have a quick drink. So I do have a vision, and my vision is to run a sustainable beekeeping operation, harvest honey and products from the hive, spread the word about good, wholesome beekeeping practices, inspire and collaborate with others to promote bees and beekeeping, including selective breeding programs, which I've just started this year. So if I can do that when I get to my box, I'll be very happy, because there's a huge amount to do there. But to me, that's what it's all about. That's what I want to achieve. And this is the man who set me off on my journey into beekeeping. This is Charles Basset, who lived in Quevert in Dino, near me, about 10 kilometers away. He was a submariner by trade, and he was a beekeeper as well, but he was the beekeeper at the time. Unfortunately, he's been dead 2 years now. And his legacy goes on. He taught me many things about beekeeping. He sold me my first 3 colonies, and I've never bought any bees since. He was my mentor, and I asked him such a lot of questions. And the main thing is, he taught me how to set swarm traps and catch wild swarms in my early days, which you can still do now. But obviously I don't particularly go for those bees now, because I think there's better bees out there to use for my honey production. So as I said, these are the 3 hives that Charles Basset sold to me. I paid the going rate. I think they were €100 a swarm. They called it a swarm. In France, a nuke of bees is called an essaim. In other words, they call it a swarm of bees, but it's not. It's a colony on 5 frames. And that was in 2009. And now I have, in 2020, I'm going into this winter with 200 production colonies, back up to my numbers, because I had a lot of winter losses last year. And now I've also got 60 mini plus mating nukes with queens in, and 80 overwintering Dadon 6-frame nukes that I'm going to use for sale and for increase next spring. So I'm hoping to actually increase to about 250 for next year, but that will be my limit. There is a limit to what you can only do yourself under the kind of practicalities of the work you have. So there you go. This is a bit of a snapshot of what I do. We have, on the left, we've got the Dadon 6-frame standard hives. On the top right, we've got some Dadon 6-frame nucleus colony boxes, but they're poly boxes, these. And the interesting thing is, we make this part, this is an eek that we put a feeder in, and means we can feed the colony straight on top of the frames, and it works really well for us. But I've got mixed thoughts on the poly boxes now, because I actually love to be able to clean them properly with a blowtorch, and you can't do that, obviously, because you end up with a puddle of polystyrene. And obviously I have a lot of these mini mating nukes, which are called the Mini Plus, and they have 6 frames in the top, 6 frames in the bottom. They're obviously a single body you start with, and you add a second body when the colony grows, and then you can split them. You can do many things with these. You can put them on top of another colony that's queenless with a sheet of newspaper between. You can harvest queens from them. You can put queens back in them. You can let them grow really strong in the spring and then break them down again. The kind of possibilities are endless. So this is the basic beekeeping year for the spring period. So I'm going to quickly go through this. And I'm keep sipping this water because I'm going to run out of steam by the end of the talk. Okay, I haven't put down January, February, but like everybody in January, February, unfortunately still doing things we should have finished in the autumn, but we are technically making frames, doing all the preparation for the spring. The Mini Plus, we have to make hundreds of frames up for that with foundation. All our frames are melted down when we have our losses at the end of the summer. They're all done straight away. So we've just got frames to re-wax by this time. That's kind of how we work. But into February, March, we're doing our first inspections. We're assessing and sorting winter losses, checking store levels in our nucleus colonies. Mostly, we don't have to feed our production colonies because the Daedon hives are so big, the frames are so large that there's plenty of food within the colony. But there's other issues you can get, but as a rule, generally, there's not a problem. April, May, the start of the spring build-up, we're going into our colonies in early April, really, and the end of March, and we're actually taking out our 2 frames that we partitioned off the hive with in the winter, because by that time they start needing space, and that's an easy way for us to give space. When we make a nuke in the autumn or late summer, I should say, we take out 3 frames of bees and brood, and we put back in a frame of foundation and 2 partitions within that colony. And then that means the bees haven't really lost their kind of energy, but they're able to survive on 7 frames perfectly well for the winter. And then come the spring, when they're ready to go, they start building on the first frame, which is foundation. And that means we know they need us to yank out those 2 other frames and give them space. Otherwise, swarm preparations start. So we're also adding supers at the end of May. It becomes, as everybody knows, a massively busy time. So we're adding supers. We then get to May, and we kind of just make this decision where we decide to start pulling our honey, because with spring honey, as you know, it crystallizes really quickly. So the spring honey extraction, we replace the super straight back onto the hives, because we obviously want to keep the energy going from the bees. In May and June, we sometimes are still harvesting honey at the end of May. We generally focus on the last 2 weeks of the oil seed rape, because we want to make sure that we get that peak period of the oilseed rapes in full flower, but we don't want to get it on too early. It's a juggling act, and it's knowing we're experiencing every area is different. And I'll say this expression, every area is different, a lot of times tonight, because it's the absolute truth. Until you know your local areas, you just have to, it's trial and error, but we're beginning to get a good pattern now. Okay, so the start of June, we are usually doing queen rearing actually by the end of May. But it depends on every year. I've got this thing now where I'm reluctant to start queen rearing. When you get a nice spell of weather at the end of April, you're often like, you hear, oh, so-and-so start raising queens. You're like, really? And then it rains and you have gales and the drones die and all this. And this is exactly what happens here. So we are cautious. May and June, so the start of queen rearing, we're getting production hives back up to full strength, because if we do get any swarming, we've got to work really fast to get these hives back up to strength. So we at least, if they don't give us much honey, at least they give us a nucleus colony at the end of the summer flow. You've got to be constantly on the ball thinking, I might not get honey from this colony, but because of the flow, it won't put honey in the super, but it'll build the colony back up again, and it'll give me a nuke at the end of the summer flow. Because it is a business, we have to, our hives have to pay. You know, we have to try and split when we can. We don't like running our colonies weak, but we have to do it. It's part of the cycle. June, we are really queen rearing, swarm checks and adding supers, because that's the start of our chestnut flow. In mid-June, it all kicks off again. It is like the chestnut comes into flower. I'll show you some pictures shortly, and it's really strong. But first of all, we got some pictures of early spring flowers. This is mimosa. I don't know if you guys get this where you are, but we have lots of it here. Now, often the weather is appalling. We have rain and gales, and bees don't even get out of the hives. This February, February last year, 2019, was an exceptional year. And the pollen coming in at the end of February was unbelievable. We were just staggered. And that's what triggered a lot of our swarming, because we had really early pollen. But we have a lot of dandelions. Excuse, there's a couple of pictures here that aren't quite as clear as I'd like, but I didn't have any pictures of dandelions to hand. So, but that still gives you the idea. We have blackthorn. This is an April, you can see it's all booming. The grass is starting to grow. The dandelions are in flower. Everything's like, oh, nice. We're finally on track, you know, after that long winter. We get the early cherries, absolutely gorgeous time of year. and then you get the domestic cherries, and then you get this, you get dreamy fields of this, just blindingly yellow oilseed rape for about three or 4 weeks. And as I said just before, we try and put our supers on the second and third week of the oilseed rape in flower, because that's our peak period where the bees, often the bees aren't ready in the first week, because the oilseed rape seems to flower earlier and earlier. And we're like, when you have a cold winter and you have losses over winter, you end up with weak colonies as well. But this year, I only had 2 barrels of spring honey. And the previous year I had 7, and I lost 2, I think, because a lot of it crystallized in the supers. But I was still happy with that because it was more than I would have done. But you kind of see the problems in the ratios. It's just, it's a bit of potluck, but you get better and better in predicting and managing it each year. This is a picture of a Prunus pedis, this shrub in the front, and I love it because it's such a fantastic shrub, and it costs nothing to buy, and they grow massive. If you ever want to get a really good flowering shrub for the garden, and it flowers exactly the same time as the hawthorn, because this is the hedge I have in my garden at home, and I let it go completely wild, but it doesn't grow too big because the soil in the summer is really dry, so it explodes in the spring. The bees don't do that well on it. They don't get a lot of nectar from it. Some years they get more than others, but for me, that my whole point of showing this picture, this hedge is a marker, and it shows me when the spring flow is nearly finished. Because when this finishes flowering, that's it. The oilseed rape's finished, the blackthorn's finished, the hawthorn's finished. There's just like slam. It just stops. It doesn't stop to nothing like the summer, but there's a trickle of small things, but the amount of nectar coming into the hives is considerably less. So we have obviously different apiaries, and some apiaries do better than others. This one is amazing in the spring because there's so much goat willow, gorse, and all that kind of stuff. And literally you've got to go to it every day. It's fantastic, you know. So this is what we don't like to see. Crystallization in the frames, we do get it sometimes, some years we don't. It all depends on how it goes, and it's the catch-22. You get a fantastic start to the year, you get a huge colony, you're risking it all, you've done your swarm checks, no sign of any queen cells. 2 weeks later, you come to do the harvest, and you get this. Why? Because the colony swarmed, and you can see here, this part here, almost in a diagonal line, that's the cold part where the remaining bees are still trying to warm this bit, but this bit was on the shoulder edges and has crystallized overnight. It's exactly the problem you have when you're trying to manage large amounts of bees. And it's just timely intervention we use to hopefully sort this problem out. So that was the spring. Just going to run over the summer period now. And it also gives you an idea of how short our season is. It's so quick, perhaps because we never stop, but it's better. I start to enjoy beekeeping more this part of the year because it's more coordinated, because the key thing is you're not trying to harvest honey in a rush and do queen rearing and make nukes. You're just trying to, everything has a place and it can all be done, but it just takes a little bit more timely. It's nice. So June, July, we're adding honey supers because that's our main flow. We're rearing queens. Some months we rear a lot more, some months we don't. It just depends on what we need. I generally do 2 batches a year, 2 big batches, because that's when I make 2 big batches of nukes. But fortunately, and he might be listening tonight, I've got a colleague, Christian, he uses a lot of queens as well. And so I have to kind of juggle our needs between us and fit it all in. So August, I've missed out June, July, August, because really that's not much to do. Once you've added your supers, that's it. You let it finish. You just kind of check everything, but there's not much to do then really. It's the only time you get a bit of a pause. Then you're straight back into it. You're starting to harvest your honey. You're trying to get those bee treatments in straight away into the colonies. Treat your mites, because those mite numbers are rocketing, because at that point in the year, you are then breeding mites, because immediately after the flow, the queen starts to slow her laying down, but then the mites are still accelerating like that, and you get that reverse level. And you are, within a month, you can double the number of mites you have. August, September, we're finishing the harvest, finished mite treatments, removal of the mite treatments. The last few splits, we do a few late ones. If we've got mated queens, we can harvest from any plus. Our emphasis in the last couple of years is really giving our nukes more time to build up before the winter, because it's easy. If you get them ready before the winter, when the ivy flow comes, they just fill the hives up. You don't have to feed them. It's brilliant. We feed them anyway, but a base amount. So October, very much the same, removing the microfilament, preparation for the winter, and we start trapping Asian hornets then. And you'll see later on why when I do a little bit of a talk on the Asian hornets. But for us here, the founding queens from this year have been flying around now, and because it's been warm, we've been able to trap a lot. November, December, winter preparation, adding the insulation, re-centralizing the brood nest, if that's what you do. Sometimes we do that, but most of the time it's not necessary. And the last feeding, but the last feeding is really in November in most years. You only start putting candy on nukes in December. So here we are, very briefly, this is our chestnut flow. You can see some chestnut spiky flowers there. You'll see the trees in the next shot. This is the classic kind of apiary in the summer. There's always one hive that doesn't perform like everyone. To give you some weight of our supers, a full super with the weight of the super as well can be between 25 and 28 kilos. Okay, so they're blinking heavy. So they are big boxes. I know you have your commercials in the UK, and also you have your British nationals. But I do believe that our Dadons are actually slightly bigger frames than your commercials. I know they're much bigger. They're almost double, almost 2 brood boxes of British nationals are the same as our, or not quite as much as our Dadon, but it's just trying to give you some idea. So you might get, out of one super, you might get 14 kilos, maybe 15 kilos of honey out of one full super. But it's not, we work on an average about 11, 12 in most cases, when you're trying to count supers and counting chickens before they're hatched. So there we are, classic bramble, the beautiful chestnut we get in. It is absolutely abundant in Brittany. Chestnut is everywhere. We are so fortunate. And I know in America, for example, there's hardly any chestnut trees anymore. It used to be full of them years ago, but they've had that bacterial infection, and there have been a few cases over here, but touch wood, cross the fingers, we haven't had that decimation of the chestnut trees here yet. We don't know whether it will happen or not, but it's holding up well. There's the chestnut trees. The whole place is full of them in between mid-June and mid-July. The hives absolutely reek. They really smell strong, but that smell goes, you just end up having that nice, strong tasting honey. And there you go, there's a classic valley. And if you look at the trees, you can see individual trees there. Some are, for example, that tree there is in full flower, nearly finished. I think you'll find that one there is just starting, but you get this for the whole month. So it's very good that you have a whole month's flowering. So you have no let up, it's brilliant. Nice full supers, just to show you what we like to see, like everybody likes to see. If this was at the end of the flow, we'll just leave it. If this was at the mid flow, I'd be taking that super off and putting one underneath, because putting a super on top when it's quite capped like that, it doesn't really do much afterwards. That's kind of how we work things. We do use a plastic cover on our frames, and we find it works great. It doesn't squash any bees, because if you look at the wax here, they built, the bees can, it actually supports the plastic when we put everything back on. These are our 10 framed honey supers, and these are the French Nico frames called Baticad, and we use these in all our honey supers. They are easy to clean out, and you might have seen in my video, I've been scraping out and pressure washing recently all my frames that had pollen in. And that's what we do in the spring. We rebuild them in the spring on 10s. These are 10s. And then after that, we can then move them to 8s, so should we wish to. And if we have enough boxes ready and made with 8s. So now I'm going to go on to the bit about the honey harvest. And this is our extraction room. I'll try and explain things. I've got some video I'll show you of different parts working to explain the extraction process. But if you see that there, that's a trolley. We have these dolly trolleys. We get 2 supers on each side, so we can stack about 8 supers high, and that's so you can get 16 supers on a trolley. They're wheeled in this side of the workshop, and then they stop about there, and then we debox them on this deboxing table. Then they go through the decapping machine, and any slurry and all the waste wax and cappings fall down into a honey spinner, and you can see there's the excess honey being spun off, and that's a really good system for recuperating the excess honey that is in the cappings. So our cappings are dry at this point. We have to empty the machine every day, but it works out great. From then on, the capped frames come off this side, go into the extractor. Everyone knows the rest. The frames are then spun. The honey comes out of the extractor and goes into this sump. Now, half of this sump is hidden, but what happens is by gravity, the honey migrates through these baffles. And by the time it ends up here, there's a little, you'll see later, there's a little float switch there, and that's pretty clean honey. We've lost most of the wax, and it just pumps straight into the barrel there. So these are the frames I'm on about. That's what we love to see. Nice full frames on 8s. And if they were all like this, I probably wouldn't be sitting here now. I'd be somewhere on holiday, but unfortunately they're not. But it's nice when we see this, and you know, you can't see any more than that. So this is the process. We're at the decapping box. It's a bit of a job. The box it's quite manual. The box has got to be lifted on, put on top of this piece of wood, which pushes the frames up, and the box falls down around the outside, and it means that the boxes are pushed out basically. So now I'm going to show you how the frames go through the decapper. And this machine works great. It's so reliable. We extract a lot of honey through it, you know. And you can see there the slurry falling down into the machine, and then the frame gets moved into the decapper. Now, we do sometimes have to scrape the frames by hand. You can see Norbert there, he's got this scraper in his hand, just there, and he's just going to scratch the frame if he needs to. But often we don't, because the machine scratches well and removes all the cappings. And this time you can see the slurry from the decapper going down the hole into the honey spinner. And then very shortly you'll see the bucket where the honey spins out. And that is such a great asset to the operation. It really does. It produces a good product. The cappings are dry, you can melt them down straight away, and there's so little honey in when you melt them down. And here's the final process at the end. There's the sump, the honey coming out the extractors and working its way down the sump and into the barrel. So there you are. That's the end result, honey in the barrel. And for all you people out there are going to ask, do I sell honey in pots? Yes and no. I've been selling some honey in pots, but most of my honey is sold in bulk at the moment because we get a good price over here. But I know I can make more money, and that's my next job, is to evolve into my own brand and my own labels and all that. But that's ongoing right this minute. So there's a lot of work to do. But to have good colonies and good honey crops, you need one thing: you need prolific queens. So let's go into some queen rearing. So why should we try and raise queens? Don't the bees do a good enough job? That's the question. A lot of people would stop right there and say, no, they do. But I would argue, I would say catching and waiting for swarms isn't reliable. The origin, the age, and the prolificness of the queen is often unknown. Importing bees from faraway places doesn't necessarily guarantee you good queens. The queens you can raise in your own area will be better suited to your area at a fraction of the cost. Overall improvements are added to your stock. You get improved pest and disease resistance by selective breeding, and it's not rocket science. Literally, you can get rid of foul brood. Sorry, you can get rid of foul brood. You get rid of chalk brood by just breeding from colonies that do not have chalk brood. It's as simple as that. You improve your honey crops without a doubt because you're breeding from colonies that are known honey bearers. You have more prolific queens with stronger colonies. It's a win-win situation. You have less swarming. You have queens replaced at programmed intervals, which is another method against swarming because you're timing your changing of queens. We don't generally have time to do that much. It's what I like to say. It's a question of if we can, we will, but obviously the queens get used in making nukes as well. So it does also speed up your production process. You do not need to wait for those nukes to make their own cells. You're not doing artificial swarms and walking away with splits. You just give them that cell and you can lose a week in the production time. And they've got better genetics. You can increase successful mating at your apiary at planned times of the year because you plan your drones when you have the maximum amount of drones around as well. It's all possible. So how can we raise some good queens? You need to have a realistic plan. And Sally asked me the other day, she wanted me to make sure that I covered this because A lot of people say, do I need to really raise queens? Should I bother? Well, this is the answer. You can easily do it. You just have to look at your requirements. What are you trying to achieve? And look at the resources you've got specifically. Okay, have you got enough? Is it worth going and do it? If you've got, say, 10 colonies, yes, I would say you can have a go at raising queens. But if you've got 2 or 3, I think you're probably pushing it. I think you really are. Look at your season, your nectar flows, raise your queens only when the bees will be doing it. Work with your bees. It's the classic thing. Don't work against them. Be completely realistic and consider group productions. 2 or 3 group beekeepers doing it together. You can shake some bees into a nuke box. You can make a hopelessly queenless colony and do it between you. You don't have to do it the way we do it. I'm going to explain a method we do, and it's the Michael Palmer 10/10 method, but it works for me, and that's what I do. So here we go. Which queen rearing method is for you? There are many methods to raise queens, as you all know. They all work, and they're all good for certain people. They don't work for everybody. They work well for some, not for others. And how can you decide on which method you're going to use? Do you have any combined experience? So just go back to your colleagues who've done beekeeping already, if you've never done it before. Books will explain all the methods, but you'll probably still want to know which one is for you. And if you work on a method that is a simplified swarm box starter and a queen right finisher, you generally won't go wrong with the way we do queens this day and age. So when is the right time to attempt to make queen cells? Let the bees tell you. When the bees start swarming your area, as you gain experience, you'll know roughly when it is at the right time. Every area is different. I say it again, and it is so true. Naturally, late spring and summer are the best times of the year. High forager numbers bringing in plenty of pollen and nectar during the nectar flows. It means you get maximum nutrition when those queen cells are made, and that's what it's all about. Good mature drones are able to fly well on warm sunny days. So do your queens when you think you've got the best drones flying around. It's just so logical. The presence of drone brood in colonies is a good indicator that the queens should have drones to mate within a few weeks. We say 40 days if you're making drones, if you're augmenting your drones. So I've shortened this next section down because I'm going to show you the 3 basic methods that we use to understand why queens make their own queen cells. And here they are. I was going to explain each one, but there's really no need because this kind of image shows it all. We have the supersedure cell, which is when the bees think there's something wrong with the queen and they don't know what quite's wrong with it, but they start making a queen cell, and often they raise a new queen while the existing queen is still in the box, and she'll go off and mate and come back. And then if most things go the way to plan, they'll kill the existing queen by balling her, or she'll swarm. Sometimes she does leave in a little swarm. At the top right, you have the emergency response, which is the response you get when the queen suddenly disappears. So suddenly the bees have lost that energy, they've lost that, my goodness, where's the queen gone? And they immediately go to the larvae that is 12 to 24 hours old, and we hope they do. This is the big thing. We don't know whether they do all the time, but we hope they do. And they make their own queen cells, but they're little stubby cells. You can see here, most of the cells are drawn up from inside the comb. And look at these ones here. This kind of thing is so easy to miss. This is what we get when we make our nukes. We make up our colonies and we make them up 6-7 days before, go in after 7 days, cut out these queen cells, leave them hopelessly queenless, which they are by that time, because they cannot make a queen with the cells they have, with the larvae they have left. And then we introduce a virgin queen to that colony then. And that's the emergency response. The last one is the swarming impulse. The build up in the spring is so strong, the queen may be getting a little bit older, the colony is completely congested, that queen pheromone is weaker in the colony because there's so many bees, and the queen thinks, right, this is a good time to multiply, good time to leave the colony. Boom, swarm cells are on their way, and off the queen goes when the first one's capped. When I say when the first one's capped, often it's when there's just a few cells made, she'll just go. But the whole idea is if you understand those 3 responses, none of those methods, though, really give us any queens in the numbers we need as professional beekeepers. But The great thing that what we discovered was that if we combine the responses of the swarming impulse with the emergency response, we can get really good usable cells in large numbers, because the bees cannot do anything but want to draw up the larvae that you put in that box, because that's all they have. All you do is put them in a position where they can do nothing but make do with what you give them. So we combine the swarming impulse with the emergency response, and we get the greatest response and the greatest acceptance of cells. And this is one thing Mike Palmer taught me. It's all in the jelly. There you are, look at that, raw jelly, absolutely fantastic. And you get that by having one of these, a cell builder. So a cell builder is an already strong colony, given 10 frames of extra brood. It combines the swarming impulse with the emergency response. As we've just said, it's so overwhelmingly full of well-fed nurse bees and forage bees that all it wants to do is swarm, but you artificially swarm it. You remove the queen just at the right time, and you remove the chances of the bees making a new queen. And they are then hopelessly queenless. That's what it is. It's a box full of bees with no purpose. You've taken all their options away. They can't do anything. So, as I've just said, what is a hopelessly queenless colony? I'd like to reinforce this because it's really important that you get this. A colony of bees that has lost its queen, its eggs, and its larvae, and has nothing to make a new queen from. So here is the cell builder. Very briefly, you have 2 brood boxes. That's the brood box with the queen in. You may need a super on it if you've got a big flow on, because you don't want to get any more nectar in those frames if you can avoid it. It just helps things. Otherwise, they start building everywhere. And then there's your top box that I'm going to show you in a minute how we add the brood to. And this, I generally use this as a feeder shell. It's just got a feeder on top of it. So I'm going to run through how we're going to set up a cell builder. And then when you see that, you'll understand how it works. So the other thing to say is, this is the same method in some respects as when another beekeeper, for instance, Ian Stepler, goes to his colonies and he shakes nurse bees from his production colonies into a box, and he uses that to build his cells. We are creating the same thing. All we're doing is creating in a different way. Mike Palmer argues that with this method, you can have a honey crop as well, and you don't really dent your production colonies. But if you've got a lot of production colonies like Ian Stepler has, for example, it doesn't matter. You could shake 20 boxes out and then you wouldn't even notice a difference when you got 1,400 colonies. So it's all about what's relevant for your production method. So 10 days before we think we're going to graft, we select an already strong colony and check it for queen cells. And that's the important thing. Above any queen excluder, we add 10 frames of brood harvested from our adjacent nucleus colonies. Now, we call them nucleus colonies. They can be brood factories. They can be any other box in the apiary where you've got brood that you can harvest. And we try and harvest brood that is going to hatch in about the next 3 to 5 days. You can have larvae in it, but it just makes it longer to hatch. And it means that if you wanted to graft earlier, you have to wait the full length of time before they all hatch out. The bees below the queen excluder will come up very quickly as you add the brood to the top box, and they'll surround the brood as if it was their own instantly. So there's none of this, we don't want these larvae, sorry, we don't want these bees, because they're not our bees. They don't know that. They just treat them as brood and they keep it warm. So there's the brood going in, adding the frame above the queen excluder. There's a queen excluder there, you can clearly see that. And we're now going to forget everything else that the brood was added. We're going to start the process on day 1. 10 days later, all the brood is hatched, or near as damn it. And it doesn't matter if there's a little bit that hasn't. You may have put a frame in that had a few sort of mid larvae stage cells that weren't capped over. They're the ones you'll have to check for queen cells in a minute. But it doesn't matter. You make this day 1. It's 10 days after you put the brood in. So here's a very simple queen rearing technique, a grafting chart. I've actually added this red line here and here, because that's the 10 days we call day 1 to 10. On day 1, we do the graft. On day 10, we put our finished cells into our nucleus colonies, or we leave them hatch in our incubator. This is when the eggs are laid. Here they hatch out day 3 to 4, and this is when your queens that are emerged, or starting to emerge, are in the nucleus colony, and that's when they go out and then they mate. Okay, but we'll use this chart to just overview everything. It's just a basic chart. We work on a 10-day process, and it's always 1 to 10. It's as simple as that. So here's me at my cell builder, day 1 of the grafting period. I'm going to run through this quickly so you get the gist of what happens. I'm going to take this top box off and move it to one side. And I mean, I'm going to move it to my left in the picture. There it is. The top box is off. It's moved to the side. That box there had the frames of brood I added. Okay. The box underneath, this still contains the queen. There's the queen excluder. The bees still think there's a queen there. They wouldn't mind, because most of that's nurse bees. There won't be many forager bees in that other box I've just moved. They're all flying back to the front as usual. Okay. So now I'm going to remove this box, and I'm going to put it on top of this hive lid, because this is what I use when I've got nothing else ready. And I'm going to rotate it 180 degrees. There we go, moving it round. And then I've moved that box 180 degrees off its stand, and it's facing opposite. So the entrance that was here, well, it was actually here, but it's not even that side now, it's around the other side. So all the bees that are leaving here, as they do, coming and going, are going to come woo back to here. And guess what? Nothing's happened. What have you done? You've artificially swarmed this box. You've moved the queen away, and all the bees are going to fly back to here. And that's all the bees that can fly. So then we put a new base down. There's our Nico base. And it's a really good thing. Our Nico bases are plastic. They're really solid. They don't rot in the light. They're reusable. They last 10, 20, 30 years. I've never seen one break yet. And they're absolutely fantastic because they're so diverse, so dynamic. So there goes the box. This was the top box. We put to the side, it goes back on the bottom. This is the Nico base I was on about. A lot of people in the UK ask me what they're like. You can see they're injection molded and they're absolutely fantastic. And they are Varroa screened, and you can slide a tray in underneath from behind or from the front to close off the base if you're treating with oxalic acid. And then you can mite monitor as well through the base. So they're a really good tool for us. So there is the original top box in its place with a new base. And all the bees now are flying back to this box. And guess what they find? They find the queen's gone. Oh no. So they're all starting to react, but they're not aggressive now. You've taken the queen away. She's still over here. So the bees only return to the place they know, and that's the front of this box. So you're getting the forager bees back automatically. And now what we must do is we must check this box for queen cells, because you cannot have a cell in a cell builder, because you're going to basically be ruining everything you create. So you have to remove every chance of it. And how do you do that? You go through and check the frames. We know that the queen was laying in this bottom box. She wasn't in the top box because it has a queen excluder. So all that will be in here will be sealed queen cells, because that queen hasn't been up in the box. The frames you put in mostly had either young larvae or capped brood. So the only thing they could do was make a cell, because when you elevate brood above a queen excluder, like in the summer when you get cells, supersedure cells in the top of the honey supers, that's exactly the same thing you get here. You get the few queen cells in here, sometimes 1 or 2, sometimes 10, sometimes nothing. It just depends, but you have to check meticulously. You shake all the frames off, you check them all. After you've done that, you get a shaker box. And what is a shaker box? It's a honey super with a excluded bottom, so you can't get a queen going into that top of the box, because what we're going to do next is we're going to shake out bees from here into this box. And why? Because we're going to add more nurse bees. The nurse bees that hatched out in that top brood box hatched out, but most of them stayed put when you move that top box off. So we want to shake extra in there and make this colony even more stronger, even bigger, even more overwhelmingly fed and full of nurse bees. So here we go. This is me shaking the nurse bees off into the box. And I'm going to leave, I'll probably shake 6, 7 frames out of this box here, and I'll leave the rest in. And that means that any brood that is and larvae in there and the queen will have enough nurse bees to keep that colony going. They won't do much. They'll just kind of tick over, but they won't be gathering much food, because there's no foragers. All the foragers are now here. They're all flying back to here. So you see what we're creating now. We're creating a super monster colony with no queen, with no eggs, with no larvae, and with all the foragers, because they all fly back to here. We're maximizing that brood nest. And there's the queen. I shake her off the frame. I didn't see her on the frame, and she arrives in the top box. Her marking on this one is actually wearing off. And you do need prolific queens to do this, because you have to end up being worked pretty hard. The eggs, the queens end up laying quite a lot, because you're adding brood, and it means you ramp up the amount of nurse bees, so the queen ends up laying more. So the queens get kind of like, after a year of queen rearing, if you use the same cell builder, which I often do, the queens are basically exhausted by the end of the year. But it doesn't matter, because you've got loads of them. So, you know, but you cannot risk a queen getting into that cell builder. And often there is more than one. So you must check every frame, shake the bees off, check for queen cells. That's what we're looking at. That's what you want. The cell builder on day one, it takes me about 3/4 of an hour to do all that process. I'm pretty quick at it now. When you first do it, you're like, oh my God, look at all these bees. It's just a nightmare. But they're not aggressive, because you take away that aggression. You kind of, they're lost very quickly. We have thousands of nurse bees left with no queen and larvae, and they cannot make a new queen. So this is what you end up with. A beautiful cell builder ready to take grafts. And that's what I do call no-nonsense beekeeping. It's not for the faint-hearted, but I do say that jokingly, because these bees are so docile. They're in no position to defend anything. They have nothing to defend. They've lost their queen. The longer you leave them, they get a little bit stressed, and they start flying around the apiary. They're crying, they're calling, they're looking for some way of finding a queen, but they can't. And this is the whole idea, that you remove that ability for them to make a new queen cell. You've removed all the larvae, you removed all the eggs, there's nothing they can do. So you then come along with your grafts and you put them in, and they just jump on those grafts and they build up fantastic cells. What I actually did was I put the top back on this box, and I love this picture because it's like really kind of dreamy, you know, it's beautiful. But I put the top back on the box, and I'd already taken the frame out and put the pollen frame in next to it. The pollen frame goes one side, probably was this side, that's the pollen frame there. But when you put the top on, you smoke the bees out of the way, and they all go back in the box, and they hang up the front. But then when you take the top off again to put the frame of larvae in, the box just boils over, because it's so fantastically well stocked. So we need a pollen frame, because pollen is what they'll feed the larvae with. Pollen frames come from queenless colonies in your apiary, and when you start having a lot of colonies, you'll find pollen frames very easily. Excuse me. From strong working colonies that you find during inspection. We had a couple of frames this year that I yanked out. You'll see one in a minute. You go through your colonies, you just think, right, that's going to be for my cell builder, because sometimes you find these pollen frames that are unbelievable, you know. Or you can make one with pollen sub, but I generally tend to always have enough pollen to find a pollen frame, and I then put supplementary feed on top of the frame as well now. Frames like that, absolutely beautiful, full of honey and pollen. They've got plenty of food. Most of the time you don't need honey in the frames, you just need pollen. A frame like that, this was a frame from our chestnut flow, absolutely fantastic, packed full of pollen. It's just like a dream. That is just total protein in a frame. So I'm not going to explain the grafting process, because that's obviously another time, and there's so much to talk about today. But I basically graft straight into cups. I don't pre-fill the cups. I use dry cups. I graft straight in. And my whole argument is, you don't need to pre-fill the cups. You don't need to worry about raw jelly. If you just scoop up a puddle of raw jelly from your well-fed breeder queen, those frames will have good larvae in that are sitting in raw jelly anyway. And then you put them straight into the cells, and then you take them straight down and put them in your hopelessly queenless setup. And because that is so overwhelmingly begging for a queen, those bees in that hopelessly queenless setup have not been able to feed any other larvae for, say, 3 or 4 hours. I try and leave my cell builder 3 or 4 hours at least before I put the grafts in. And they literally jump on them, and they just like exude raw jelly into those cups instantly. So all the people who say, oh, you know, you should I say that's absolutely baloney, because for me personally, I kind of prove that it doesn't matter. You get fantastic acceptance, and you don't need to pre-fill the cells if you set your builder up properly. And that's what I use. So there's our grafted larvae, and in goes the frame of grafted cells into the cell builder. And then this is actually 2 days after. I say 24 hours after, but this is 2 days after. I think in this particular batch, I got 52 out of 56. Pretty happy with that. You know, you can see this as day 2 because these cells are slightly well formed. And this was because I had a set of bad weather after day 1. But it happens. It doesn't really matter. But I've lost a day of using my cell builder because we had rain. But you know, I've still got 2 or 3 days left of using after this batch came out. So this is what we have. You have beautiful cells full of raw jelly. That's kind of, you know, you get that and you're like, right, we're on the way, but it's only the first part. And this is a picture of exactly what happens. Sometimes you don't get the best acceptance. So you can see here, I've got that one there's a dud, that one there's a dud, that one there is, but all these, you see you've got nice white cells larvae floating in jelly. So you take the ones away that are duds and you replace them with the good ones. And then that's why you can have beautiful bars that you put in your finishers. Here are my finishers. These are my 5 over 5 frames at the top, 5 frames at the bottom. I use these because it works really well for me. And these are also my brood factories. So in the whole of the season, I spend most of them over, if I bring in new colonies from my nucleus colony yard that's just overwintered, I'll bring them in and there'll be 6 frames, and then I'll put 3 frames at the bottom and 3 frames at the top, and space for them to grow during the season. But I spend most of my time harvesting brood from these and juggling them around and stopping them swarming, because that's what they're for. So I put my my started cells. You can see these actually are a little bit younger. This was day after day 1, 24 hours later, I put these into my finisher. I move the frames apart. There's a queen excluder between the top and the bottom, so the queen can't come up and destroy the cells, and the cells get finished beautifully. Now, the benefits of using a finisher, okay, you don't have to use a finisher, but I do find that finishers finish your started cells and you get less cells per strong colony, meaning that you get the maximum amount of nurse bees attending to those cells. You free up your starter box, which I showed you how we built. You free that up within 24 hours, and immediately within 4 or 5 hours, they become hopelessly queenless again, and you can put a second batch of grafts in, or a third one, or a fourth, and even a fifth if they're really strong. And I've done it 5 times, and it works absolutely great. And the most important thing is, for me, using a finisher, it reduces the risk of a rogue virgin entering your hopelessly queenless setup. And she will kill all those cells. So you imagine that box you saw had 50 cells, 51 cells? If you had a virgin queen coming in there and you hadn't moved them to the finishers, you hadn't separated them all out and reduced the numbers down, you'd only reassembled that colony. Say you were going to plan to reassemble it in 4 or 5 days' time when they were capped. You'd get to that colony and find that there wasn't any capped cells in that box, that the queen had gotten on day 1 or day 2 and ruined all those cells. For me, it kind of spreads your bets using finishers, and you end up with as good as, if not a better product at the end. And your finishers can be your brood factories. It's really easy, 5 over 5. Do I need to use a finisher? It entirely depends on your own requirements. There is no reason to have a finisher if you only want to produce, say, 10 or 20 queens. When your cells are capped over on day 5, you simply reassemble the colony and put your finished cells above the excluder, and or in a part of the colony, because you can have side parts that are free from the queen. It's excluded away from the queen. And personally, I like to raise a lot of queens over a short period of time. So I have a well set up starter, means you can push up to 200 cells through per cell builder. And there you go, beautiful cells, full of raw jelly. Everyone is perfect. That's like completely peachy as far as I'm concerned. The kind of thing that you only dream of in the winter. So between day 6 and day 10, I generally move my queen cells now to the incubator, or I would cage them inside the hive and let them hatch into cages like you can see here. But I will reiterate that moving them on day 6 isn't the best idea. If you can move them on day 8, day 9, it's much better, because I have found that I've been careful, I have damaged queen cells on day 6, day 7 when they're not quite formed inside. Because don't forget, when they're capped over, they're still a larvae, and they metamorphosize between day 6 and day 9, and then day 9, 10 is when they start to come alive and that they've got their shape. Then you can't really damage them that easily. So these are queens that have hatched out in the incubator, and I put the finished cells in the bottom on their sides, and the ones that are still hatching out in the top, and I have to check them 3 or 4 times a day. So what can you do with your queens or your queen cells? Well, we all know what we can do with them. We can do endless things. You can use them in splits, prepared 5 days before. You can use them to make up mating nukes, mini plus systems. You can sell them directly. You can sell the queens afterwards when they're mated. You know, that it's our kind of bread and butter of beekeeping, having queen cells. If you've got queen cells available, you're kind of calling the shots, really. You can do what you like, you know. So this is my colleague Christian in the mating station. Here we have the mini plus we use. We tend to generally get about 4 cycles a year. So you get a queen, well, let me start again. You'll get your box ready. You might have had overwintered mini pluses that have grown strong. You break them down, and then you put your first virgin queen in, and you generally get about 4 cycles in the year. And that gives the bees enough time to give you nice mated queens that you end up with nice eggs in the cells like this. And this is what we love to see. If we see that every time, we're really happy. But we don't always see this, but in say 80% of the cases we do. But that's what we like to see. And then you get beautiful brood patterns like this in our mini plus frames. And this is why it's so good, because you can see the queen's ability to lay, and you can assess her a little bit before you either sell her or you put her somewhere else, you know. But when we see that, we're like, great. But then what we're going to do with it, right, we'll have to either sell it or put it in a nuke, a bigger nuke, or give that one more space, because we know that when that brood hatches out, that colony is going to explode. It's all about juggling the size as well. And this is me outside my bottom barn. I've got some lovely old nukes. I took this picture years ago, and I've got a big blown up picture on my wall at home. I love this one. But it's just some old nukes I had that they're ready to go off, be made to be splits at the production hives, and then I'll bring them back to the mating station, and here they are at the mating station with bees and brood in there, ready to have a queen put in. That's kind of how we do it. Feeding, you must feed your cell builder regardless of the flow. And we feed a little to give the colony the feeling that it's still nectar coming in, because what if it rains for 2 days? You just need to keep that going. All the nukes we make, we're giving them an initial feed of at least 1 litre of syrup, usually 2. And they are fed when the queen goes in, because we feel that helps acceptance. Here's the syrup we get. A lot of people in the UK use the same delivery. I think it's Van House, is it? But it's from Belgium, this syrup. It comes overnight, and we go to a local beekeeper we work with, and we take all our containers there, these IBCs, intermediate bulk carriers. Interestingly enough, the ones you can see there, they're the same as the other ones in the picture, but the weight of them is incredible. 1 container that holds 900 litres of syrup is, I think it's about, it holds 600 litres of syrup is 900 kilos. So it weighs literally nearly a ton. So it's a lot of weight, and we have to use pallet trucks to get them around and get them off my truck. This truck here, I can only put 2 on, and at a time, and we really struggle getting them off. It's a bit of a job. So augmenting natural drone comb, we like to augment our colonies that we want to produce drones 40 days before we think we'll have queens ready to mate. It's one of the tricks you can do. That's the kind of drone frame I love. I do not use drone comb as a way of treating my varroa. I would rather zap my drone colonies with oxalic acid 2 or 3 times during the spring, just to keep the numbers down, because I believe personally that we are not giving, we're putting in worker comb in all our colonies, period, and we are not giving the bees enough drone comb. that they would naturally have in the wild. If you look at a wild colony that's in a tree and you count the drone comb, there's an awful lot more than there is in our colonies. That's why I believe there's issues with queens not getting mated properly. I know there's huge other amount of issues with varroa and viruses and pesticides, but it's one of the things we can do. So you have lots of drones. So how can you help to get your queens better mated? What you can do is you can do the following. You can add drone comb to your best selected stocks 40 days before you think you'll have virgins on their mating flights. You move all your best stocks with the most desirable drones nearer to your mating station and move the worst stocks away. I do this automatically because I get so angry when I get angry bees, because they are like, you are going to the naughty apiary, you are going, they're gone. I get them all in, they're just gone in one day. And then you're like left with what's good. Work with your nearest beekeeping friends if you can, if they want to do it, but don't always do it. If you offer them some queens, they usually welcome you with open arms because they haven't got the ability to raise good queens. Make your mating station returning queen friendly. Okay, give your queens landmarks, give the nukes painted marks, give them a piece of wood on the roof, give them something they can identify the place they're flying back to, because it does make a huge difference. And I do say this again, be aware that if you're taking drone comb from colonies to designated drone colonies, you're potentially boosting the varroa, obviously, because we all know that drone comb takes longer in the cycle by 5 days to be ready to hatch, and the varroa are more likely to head to that when they're looking for a larvae to go under before it's capped. So how do I introduce my queens into my hives? Often I use pushing cages, which I absolutely love. The non-laying queen is placed under a cage 5 days before. The bees on the outside don't know her, but the nurse bees underneath that cage hatch out.
Good. She's been accepted. Eggs in the cells.
And there's eggs in the cells here. Actually show you this. If you look at the first part, you can see there's eggs in these cells. If we just zoom forward, you can see there the larvae and the eggs quite clearly. But what I was explaining before is this method is so good because when you're trying to introduce the queen you have in a mailing cage is a non-laying queen. And when you're trying to introduce her to a colony that's expecting a laying queen, there's issues always, or even if they don't like her. But what happens is if you put it on emerging brood, the brood hatches underneath that cage and comes up and starts feeding that queen, and she begins to lay into the cells. And then the bees on the inside communicate with the bees on the outside, the pheromone starts to flow, and before you know it, everyone's happy, even the bees on the outside of the colony. And that's what we call the pushing cage method. And it works really well. It's virtually guaranteed to get the bees accepted. It's a little bit long to do it, but you don't want to lose queens because they are so precious. So why not use that method? And this is to finish off what I love. This is, I've got this picture blown up as well at home. It's a nucleus colony just after the queen has come back from mating. If you look in there, all you see is gorgeous white, well-fed, glistening larvae that are just about 2-3 days old, maybe 4 days old, and all around it you see this nice colony of well-behaved bees with so much food and everything they need. It's like, if they were all like that, like I said, I probably wouldn't be speaking to you now, but it doesn't always work like that. So there's some of my overwintering nucleus colonies. I tend to have 3 or 4 sites where I put nukes to spread the load, and they all work really well. So what can go wrong with a cell builder? Before someone asked me the question, as I said before, a mated queen or a virgin queen gets into the hopelessly queen setup and you lose all your cells in 24 hours, gone. You might have missed a queen on the cell frame, or she flew. And sometimes she can fly. There's always one that does it. Sometimes you can see her because she's marked. You think, oh, the queen's gone in. So you have to shake the whole thing back through the box and you'll find it. But just be aware, it does sometimes happen. Sometimes you get a cell that drops down onto a frame and they build the cell where it lands. In other words, between the frames. So there's one, and this one hatched out, and there was a virgin in the bottom box, but it happens. And this one, here's a picture of the cell. It's fallen down out of the frame with the grafted larvae in. It landed between the frames, and then they built it because they were hopelessly queenless, and wherever they find a larvae, they'll build it. It would have been the same as an emergency cell. So it's all an example of what can happen at a different time. So that is the queen rearing done. And it's all time for a little bit of a break, if that's okay with you. So we'll stop and we'll resume in about 5 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Everybody, we're about to start.
Okay, so keeping bees with Asian hornets. Here we go. There is your lovely Asian hornet, an invasive species that came into France 2004. It originally entered France in the Gironde area, which you look at the map, it's sort of west coast, lower down. I should have a map of it, but I don't. This is my #1 kind of mantra about this: don't panic. If you watch Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and you open the book, what comes up first? These words. This will kind of calm your fears a bit, but you'll go, oh, I can't not panic, it's Asian hornets. Let me just try and explain why I think beekeepers in the UK won't ever have a major problem. Here we are. Here's the identification at the start. I want to run through this just so we touch base with it all. The commune, the frelon, this is obviously the French wording, frelon commune, which means common hornet on the right and Asian hornet on the left. The Frelon asiatique, it's called, is called Vespa velutina nigrithoraks, but means black back. Okay, but the identification key is these yellow legs. That's what everyone finds the easiest thing to understand it by. And obviously, once you know a common hornet, Vespa crabo is the name of the common hornet. Once you know that anyway, and you've seen it in the UK, you will, without a doubt, be able to tell the difference straight away. But there is an app out which I absolutely applaud, and it's working because people are using it. It's really good. So this is really the crux of the talk, because I use this twice to explain why you can keep bees with Asian hornets. Now, I pulled this off the internet, and I do apologize if it's not as clear as I like, but it works. So if you imagine around here, this is the annual life cycle of the hornet. They start here as an emerging female in the early spring. Now, that's the thing with Asian hornets, it's the early spring. They are overwintering from the previous colonies that produce the queens. So now we are seeing these queens now, but we'll talk about that after. But here we have the emerging queens in January, February. So they start to fly much earlier than the Vespa crabo, the common hornet queens. And the good thing about that is we can trap a lot earlier, and we don't tend to trap the common hornets, which is important to us because common hornets do a lot of good. They eat all the aphids, they eat flies, they blue bottles, all the things we consider nuisance pests. They keep the numbers down. They fit into the ecosystem well. Where the Asian hornets, they predate pollinators, and that's the thing, they predate them really well. So I made an extra addition to this diagram. Trapping starts here. So we put our traps out mid-February. Generally, it's warm enough for the founding queens of the current year to start flying. And you can trap all the way to June, because in June, there's little point in trapping, because what happens is the founding queens have raised their little nest. There it is. They've raised their nest, and they've raised enough workers to support that queen. So by this time in June, she can stay in the nest and lay. And that's when, shortly after, is when the queens migrate with the colony. They leave their starter nest and they migrate to the top of a tree or in brambles or wherever they're going to make that big summer nest. But if you look here, just there is when we finish beekeeping. We're done for the year. So what does that tell you? Well, it means that we don't have to really expect our bees to perform when they're starting to hawk in front of the hives. So what we do is we have these doors that you'll see in a minute. We generally do all our beekeeping work. So from here it'll be the spring flow, then there'll be the gap, then there'll be the summer flow, and there's the harvest in August. Okay, we are still harvesting sometimes in August, yes, but the work we ask the bees to do is done. So for us, that's the biggest thing. That's what gives us the ability to work around the hornets, because they never build up strong enough until you get to July, August, till you start to see a presence in front of the hives. You might see one or two around here, and you try and swap them and you try and trap them. Great, that's what we do. But when you get to here is when you start to see a lot of the workers, they're out and they're starting to hawk your bees. They're hovering in front of the hives looking for to get that protein from your bees. Here I've got trapping here is still warm. Now, the recently emerged queen, so you've got your colony, it goes to the top of that tree, it becomes a really big nest very quickly, it moves to an area that's full of insects, a full adult, well, not adult, a full developed Asian hornet nest will eat over a ton of insects in a specific area. It will reduce the amount of insects for all the other animals in the area, the bats, the moths, all this kind of stuff, all the swallows, the birds, every kind of other animal you imagine that eats insects will suffer a decline in insect prolificness because these devils will get in there first and just overtake everything in that area. They are heavy predators. And then what happens is the end of the season, they produce drones as well as queens, they mate, and then there's your founding queens again, the cycle is complete. But what we can do is we know that if it's warm, like it has been this year, we have trapped hundreds and hundreds of Asian hornets that we didn't know we had because it's been a kind of very good year for producing queens for them. And we think they're mostly queens, but it's a bit like wasps. At the end of the year, which just happened this year, the wasps are kind of bored. There's nothing for them to do. They're just hanging around. We're just waiting for those first frosts to take them out. And they haven't had those frosts this year. And we're seeing still Asian hornets around hives. So that kind of explains in an overview how it works. There is a starter nest, which you'd see sometime in, say, April, probably March, April. They'll start making these small little golf ball sized nests, and that's a little bit bigger, that one now. And they will end up the size of a football. I know that John DeCarteret from Jersey Beekeepers Association and all the fantastic group there will be watching this saying, well, this is pretty bread and butter, but I'm trying to explain it to you guys because they see it all the time there and I see it all the time. But for you guys, this is interesting. This is what you'll see when you see an Asian hornet making that first start. So here she is, she's in her nest, she's going out, she's foraging, she's bringing back protein, which she can find. It's a very dangerous time for this queen because if she doesn't find enough food, the nest will fail and she'll die. So she's putting everything on the line, but that's how they do it. It's a risk thing. They put everything on the line, they build the nest, and usually everything is good. Now, I killed this one because a friend of mine owned a house nearby and it was in the doorway. So it was great. It was a good opportunity. And I actually do have a video, but I don't have it now. And all these larvae are wriggling. You can see in this cell, this was the middle of that golf ball nest. And inside you've got these big eggs that she's been laying there. So there's the eggs. These are the developing larvae that she's feeding. That one's about to be capped over. This has been capped over. And these will shortly would have been emerging young workers. So she was on the process to creating that first build-up of help in her nest. And that's exactly what they do. This is why these insects are actually pretty amazing. They're pretty dynamic. They come from nothing to this huge colony over a very short space of time, which I know is ringing all the alarm bells and all the beekeepers in the UK. But hang on there, hang on a minute. Okay, so this is what you get in midsummer. You'll get a nest right up there, you see? This gives you the scale of things. This is why you don't see the nest. This poplar tree has lost its leaves, and there is the Asian hornet nest right at the top. There's not even anything we can use other than a helicopter, to be honest, to get to that nest if we'd have seen it. But by the time you see it, most of the time they've made the queens and they've dispersed. So this is a no-go. There's nothing you can do about it. Here's the same picture again. It just shows the size of the nest. It's not that big a nest here. And that's what I'll show you in a minute, is that the nest size is actually smaller than, for instance, it would be if we were in mid-France, where there's the early heat and the greater number of insects. We are so influenced by the English Channel here that it keeps our temperatures down. So this is me at not our workshop, the other workshop that my colleague used to use. And this is an Asian hornet nest that we cut out. You can see in here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 5 layers of developing brood, and it may have been queens, we don't know. But that's just to give you some idea. We've got 5 layers there. So the nest is quite small. When you see this, this is what we get as well. We've got 2 nests here on the same road, right near our apiary, but there's nothing we can do about it. And look at the height of this one. And it's like, that must be 50, 60 meters up. They're totally inaccessible. They're on a bank above a road. Possibly you could get to it with a fireman's ladder, maybe, yeah, but The resources you need to control this are unreal. And I know Jersey Beekeepers Association have done a lot, and they do have the help of the fire service and specialist equipment. And wherever they found a nest, they've been able to take it out. But in France, the problem we have is we don't have the resources, and there's less foot soldiers on the ground. So this is that first nest there. This is it here in the tree before it was cut out. You can just see the size of it. It's quite a misleading photo. This was about 7 degrees in the degrees temperature early in the morning. There'd been a frost on the ground, a radiation frost, a white hoarfrost everywhere, but the hornets were still flying in November, and we destroyed that nest, and it stopped those hornets producing queens. This is what I'm on about. This is pulled off the internet, and it shows you how big the nest can get in mid-France. And this is why I say to the beekeepers in the UK, you won't have a big problem because of this. This picture tells the whole story. Where this is warm, they have an early start, their prolificness amount of insects, and the Asian hornet queens get going in February, March time. And they are gone. They just start making these nests, and they are enormous, okay? Double the size than we get here. This is one I had outside my house that I didn't know about. And this is why it's very interesting, because they're kind of quite stealthy in the way they build nests. So this was the nest right in front of my house. There's my house. And there's the nest. Gargantuan thing. There's the hornets flying in and out. I didn't get stung here because I hadn't disturbed it. But boy, oh boy, was that a big nest. Here's the picture. As I say, the nests are easy to kill when you can get poison into them. It's just getting to the nest and finding them. There it is. There you can see there where the commune, who actually will come and treat the nest for free. It's not that specialized, to be honest. It's just a permethrin powder sprayed in through a hole. Anywhere they just plunge a lance in and spray the permethrin powder into the nest, and within an hour to 6 hours, the nest is completely dead in most cases. It's very, very quick. There you can see the different tiers of the brood sections of this nest. Quite amazing, fantastic creatures, amazingly dynamic. And the point as well is they have kind of naturalized, we feel, a bit in France, where they've moved from going to the top of trees, they've moved down to ground level now, and they're making nests in brambles. As you can see, there you are. That's the bramble in front of my house, and they made this huge nest in front. But I've got an apiary, my cell building apiary, within 100 meters of this nest. And did I see a lot of Asian hornets? No, I did not. I had no idea this nest was in front of my house, because also, as well as eating pollinators, they are diversifying. They're eating everything else in that area. They're taking spiders out of webs. They're taking grasshoppers. They're taking anything they can find. They are just super duper clever insects. You know, they really are smart. So back to this again, I just wanted to show you this, that we do this trapping, and I wanted to include this diagram once more so that you can see how important it fits in. Because here is a Asian hornet hunting in front of one of my hives, but notice the doors we've got, okay? This is our defense. When we've finished our bee work before the numbers start to build up, we put our green doors on, and it stops, in most cases, the hornets entering the colony. Now, they only generally enter the colony when the colony, it's like wasps, when it's not well guarded and when the colony is weak. But putting these doors up does help really well. It does stop the hornets going in, so the bees get less stressed. But the key to this video is look at the group of bees on the left-hand side. They are stressed. They do this kind of clustering thing because it apparently helps returning bees and diverts the bees from the Asian hornets. I'll play it a couple of times because you see the Asian hornets aren't that successful at actually catching bees. They have to spend a lot of time. And if you've ever watched a common hornet, they're kind of like the most clumsiest insect in the world. So that's why they don't catch many bees. But when you watch these guys, they're a little bit better at it, and they can pick off quite a lot. And we say if you have 1 or 2 Asian hornets permanently in the front of your hive, that is generally not a problem. It's when you have more than a presence of 3 or 4 that really does start to reduce the number of bees in the colony and stress the colony so much. We are lucky here. We don't have this presence of a large number of these insects until later in the year. And by then, we've hopefully got everything under control. We've got our doors on. What I do is when I do my summer splits, when I finished, I put the mouse guards up. So these are joint mouse guards and Asian hornet traps. So the bees can come and go quite easily for those two gaps, but the hornets can't get in and the mice can't get in. So it does two jobs. And also for me, it means I know I've been in that colony, I've split it or whatever I've done to it, checked it, and I've now made it ready for the autumn and winter. So it's kind of a process we go through. So here's some example of the doors we use. Classic defense against the hornets. Some areas suffer more, some areas suffer less. This is some traps we had at the workshop. And these are the Vita Farm traps, which we are moving more to, which I'm moving more to. My colleague's been using them for longer than me. And the beauty of the traps from Vita Farm are you don't need much bait in them. You don't need much actual pack, they call it, or bait or juice, so you don't have to mix up so much and it keeps the cost down. I used to make my own bottle traps and they work well, but the problem is you need quite a bit of the attractant inside, and I used to use white wine, beer, and blackcurrant cordial, and it works really well. And the great thing is you don't need expensive white wine, which is like phew, So this is like something from a scare, the Rocky, something from a scare show. It's like these are almost certainly adult emerged queens. They are the abdomens on them are enormous. So we think we did a lot of trapping. This was last year. A lot of trapping of emerging queens here, but it's like something out of a scare movie. It's terrible. And that's the Vita Farm traps. They work really well. This is the bottle traps I use. This is in the spring. This is early in the year. This is, I think, probably March time. This would have been, and I've just filled up the traps for the first time, and they're starting to catch a few Asian hornets. Great. And these are queens. These are founding queens because all the workers have gone. There'd be no other reason to think they're anything else. So when you start catching them in the spring, that's what it is. So the reality is when you get a lot of Asian hornets around, you have to put traps up. And this is what we do in the autumn. We did this year. This is taken 4 days ago. You can see these traps from Vita Farm work really well. They're half full or full of caught Asian hornets. This is my colleague Christian holding the bar up. We put a bar between each hive. We did trap a lot here, and some apiaries had less, some apiaries had more. So it was just a good photo shoot to show how effective these traps are. And that's the kind of thing you do. You have an apiary where you've got one installation here, one here, another one here. And the fact is that we caught a lot of these adult queens, but there was also less tired, worn out Asian hornets that were going to predate our hives. So we took the pressure off the colony. It gave them that, we kind of depressurized the area by removing that stress. So that's the attractant they sell. It's not cheap. That's about 28 euros, I think, for a bottle like that. But it does about 50 traps. So it's pretty good. It's really good stuff. So these are my own personal thoughts, and these are my own personal thoughts. I'm saying that absolutely clearly, okay? But I'll just read this out for you, okay? They are still keeping bees in the Gironde area of France, where hornets made their debut in 2004. Okay, we in Brittany are right on the north coast of France, where the English Channel maintains this and inhibits this early growth of nests. And I feel that in the UK, it'll be very similar. Some years are worse than others. In the United Kingdom, nests have been eradicated quickly because of well-placed resources and plenty of foot soldiers. And I will add, the JBKA have done, the Jersey Beekeepers Association have done a lot of work because they are constantly getting nests because they are getting Asian hornets coming across the channel, because we on the French side have got so much area we can't manage. But there's a great group there, Alistair Christie, Bob Hogg, John DeCarteret, Tim Defoe, all these guys have been working really hard, and loads of volunteers, loads of them, to just track down these nests, and they've been doing a really good job. But it's given everyone a lot of experience on how to deal with them. And they're probably going to wonder why I'm saying this, but because I've kept bees for a long time with Asian hornets, I'm saying I do not think Asian hornets will ever pose a serious threat to bees in the United Kingdom if the current level of alert is maintained. And that means they keep the foot soldiers. If they get an outbreak, they monitor it. I just think they're doing a great job. I think they've got a great app. I think people are aware of it. I know there's been a lot of scaremongering with the wrong publicity from, we've got an invasion of the giant Asian hornet, and it's not that. You know, the Daily Mail, some papers have been sensationalizing this release of the wrong killer hornet, and it's not like that at all. Every nest they've had has been tracked and traced, and all the workers have been removed and the nest removed really professionally, which is really good. And I think it will continue like that. There's no reason to say it won't. In France, you imagine the surface area we have here, we cannot police it. We cannot get to these nests. And unfortunately for Jersey, it means they're going to continually have reinfections. But it's something we're going to have to learn to live with. So Sarah Bunker did this really good Asian hornet handbook about 2 years ago, I think now. She sent me a copy because I was able to contribute a little bit with my ramblings about my work here on my beehives. So it was really interesting to read this book, and it's a fantastic book. I recommend anyone should, if they want to find out about Asian hornets, should buy it and get a copy. It's really, it's got everything in it you need to know. So thank you for your time. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation, and we've covered a lot of stuff, and I've talked a lot. But I really wanted to give you kind of a snapshot of how we are in Brittany and how we keep bees here. I don't know all the answers. I just go by what we kind of do, and I go by who else is out there giving me feedback and giving me tips and pointers, and to try and maintain that good, wholesome beekeeping that we want to project. We want to keep going, want to work on our Varroa, we want to do breeding programs, want to work with everybody else and try and get the Asian hornets down. It's just all about communication, and I can't thank you enough for allowing me to give this talk tonight. But also, if you want me to do a talk on queen rearing or something else later in the winter, I'll be happy to do that, because I've got more information on it, which we can hopefully pencil in for another day. But thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the talk.
Not to anybody else, just me.
Okay.
Okay. Do you want to stop sharing your screen?
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Okay, we've got lots and lots of questions. I'm trying to work out where to start. So if I start at the
let me exit my okay, let me exit this. Okay, you're back. Great.
I've got everybody on the gallery, on the, so gallery view. So we've had people, lots and lots of people from different places. And so the first question somebody asked was, do you clip your queens? And if not, why not? Okay, I do clip my inseminated queens, because I've started inseminating queens this year and a little bit last year when Alicia came over and was able to help me. And she did a load at the start. She showed me how to do all that, and she was brilliant. So this year I've done a few. I've got 8 clipped queens in boxes now that are going into the winter, and those are the ones I clip. Yes, I'm looking at maybe doing it for all my colonies, but I kind of prefer not to do it. I just feel that if a colony is going to swarm, I kind of want to let it go and settle somewhere, and then I'll find it after, in most cases. I just don't like the thought of turning up to this mass of bees. But when you get to a queen that you've made under the insemination process, that's pretty valuable. So I'm prepared to spend a bit of time if she does go, and there's a mess of bees. That's what I generally do. Can I just say to everybody, there are a lot of questions. So, Richard has said to me he'd be happy to answer all of them. So,
I'll do my best.
Please, I'm not making him sit there with his wine for hours. So, and also you mentioned Alicia. I mean, I think that's on your blog, Hawaii, is it?
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, many people may not know that you went to Hawaii and learned.
Yeah, I was able to go to Hawaii and see all about small hive beetle as well, and also about a little bit about Arista bee research, where Alicia was working for at the time. So we did, it was all about Varroa breeding, which is fantastic. So I'm starting my program here now, not on the same level, but I've got a series of queens that I've had from Arista that I'm now overwintering, and I'll be monitoring them and doing mite counts on them next year to see if they've got any mite resistance. So it's all really exciting, but it's something I'm slowly moving into because it's a lot of work. We have to actually assess each frame when we do mite counts, and you have to count the different stages of the varroa underneath, if there is varroa, because that's what's important to signal whether the bees are resistant to mites or not. And then if we find a colony that is resistant, we breed from that, and that's how it works. You move forward through that. But I can't say too much more because I'm only learning it myself. So, but yeah, fantastic.
That's good. Okay, I'm not sure I understand this one completely. Any results from your AZ hives? How did you find
AZ hives, right? Yeah, I've got 2 AZ hives. They're both at the workshop. They're both queen right. They're both full of bees. I haven't done an update on that on my YouTube channel, which is probably what the questions come from, because I just run out of time this year. My time constraints are so tight. My AZ hives I absolutely love, and next year I will do cut comb from them because I can use them for cut comb, because they're perfect for that. And the other thing is Alicia was over this year and we were going to get some frames and put them in for cut comb, but they didn't arrive in time and I wasn't organized enough. So you understand from me, I've only just made the transition to be able to just to do bees. So there's lots of loose ends that, lots of loose ends that I didn't really tie up the way I wanted to this year, but that's just the way it is. It is what it is. You can't be everywhere and do everything.
Okay. This is the question I asked actually. Why are the supers covered in plastic?
They're covered in plastic because they make a cheap cover, and there's no problem with humidity. You can rip the cover off quickly, put another super back straight on top if you want to add a super. You can overwinter them just fine, providing you've got the insulation or the aluminium foil in close contact with the plastic. It's just a frame cover. We don't see any reason to use crown boards. Yeah. The only reason I would like to use crown boards is, and it's a reason I've thought about a lot recently, is if I want to give pollen sub, a crown board can be flipped over so you have a bigger bee space above the brood nest if you want to feed candy or if you want to feed pollen sub in the spring. Now, I've been feeding pollen sub in the autumn, and there's some little snippets of information come out that pollen sub in the autumn isn't perhaps the best idea, but when they've had nothing like last year, I wasn't taking any chances. So that's what I've done this year. But my bees are going into the winter looking good. So,
yeah.
Fingers crossed.
So this is a question, you may not want to answer this one. How much does a barrel of honey sell for in France?
Okay, at the moment, wholesale, you might get €6.50 to €7 a kilo wholesale if you're selling good quality summer honey. If you're selling spring honey, you might get €4.50 to €5 a kilo if you're selling it by the barrel.
Okay.
That's the going rate. It's what it is. It varies, but it's about the going rate. So if you think a barrel holds approximately 290 kilos, it's about €2,000, about.
Okay. And now we're coming to Martin's questions, who, so your queen rearing is now well established. So what strategy do you use for replacing your existing hived queens?
As I said before, we try and replace the queens in the second year. In other words, if they haven't swarmed in the first year. But the majority of times you don't have the amount of queens you always want, and you don't end up doing as many as you'd like. The ideal thing would be to have this precise amount of queens. You say, right, I've got 100 hives. So I've got 200 hives in my production. I'll requeen 100 this year and 100 the following year. That's a great scenario to work for. Half one year, half the other. Then every 2 years, they're all changed. But it doesn't quite work like that in reality because there's so many other factors. You're making nukes, your colleague wants some, the weather isn't good. It's a nice thing to work to, and when you can, you do replace them. But when you have swarming, when you have a bad weather, it often eats into that mantra. That's what we work for, but we can't always do that.
Okay. Is your choice of queen from F1 stock or daughters from established nukes, so you know that they're laying efficiently?
We do the both. We generally breed from inseminated queens or from island mated queens, which are F1s, but they're island mated F1s. So we know that the percentage of variability is more refined, and when we graft from that queen, we know that the 50% of the genetics that travel to that mother queen when she's born, sorry, that travel to the virgin queen when she's born, is kind of a good 50%, you know.
Yeah.
The problem is when you breed from F2s or F1s in your own apiary, you are opening up a can of worms, because you do not know what you're going to get when you do the F2. So we generally always produce F1s from either inseminated queens that we buy in, or from inseminated queens that I've done that are tested every spring. So I might look at them, they've got great laying pattern, they're calm, they look productive, they're starting to bring loads of spring honey. I go, right, I'm going to run some daughters off this one. That's generally what I try and do. It's all looking what you've got. Nothing is perfect, nothing ideal. The problem I have is around my apiaries, I have a lot of beekeepers with a lot of black bees.
Yeah.
So I'm relying on starting with the best possible traits I can and augmenting the area heavily with my drones to hopefully get some good F1s out of it. That's all we can really do here. It's very, very difficult, unless you inseminate everything, and that's pretty tricky. You know what I mean?
Continuing on the same subject, do you replace only when they start to fail in the spring or autumn time? This is again Martin.
Yes, definitely. If we have a failing queen, but you'll pick it up anyway in the spring. And we obviously requeen when they're starting to fail, but it's not really a failure. They're just not very good queens, and you get it all the time. You have an apiary with 20 hives in, and 17 out of the 20 are doing well, and there's always one or two, and that's when you say, right, I won't even requeen this one, I'll split it into 3 or 4, and that's the best scenario, because you're getting 3 or 4 colonies from that one colony. It's not that she's really failing, it's just she's not doing what she's supposed to do. She's doing the laying of brood, she's still clean, she's still doing everything, but she's just not that prolific, so you just get rid of her. You either divide the colony or you give her a new queen. You know, it's straightforward. It's what a lot of bee farmers do. You have to be kind of ruthless. It's like you do with cattle, any other livestock. You have to weed out the rubbish, because you don't want that queen producing drones that are going to fly around and mate with your other stock.
Well, so on that same subject then, you know, have you observed differences in your artificially inseminated queens over the free flight, you know, mated queens, or do you not allow the latter?
To be honest, most of my inseminated queens don't perform as good as my F1 queens, because the problem is, and this is my personal view, and it's a view shared by quite a few other breeders, it's the F1s that give you the honey. The F1s are the cross that they've got the fire in their belly. They might be a bit slightly more protective or defensive or aggressive, whatever you want to call it, but it's the F1s that give you the honey, and that's what you want. You want that first cross. And if you breed from a breeder queen and you open mate her with your other good stock, then that's when you'll get honey crops. And that's the key to it, I think. I don't believe that, yes, F0 we call, or inseminated queens are still really good queens, but they're like so pedigree, they almost don't have to forage honey, because they're above if that makes sense. Yeah. It just, when you give that first cross, you generally tend to get fire in their belly. And I've had breeder queens I bought that are island mated that don't seem that special, and yet you cross them once and you get fantastic bees. Okay. That's kind of key to it. It's a bit of an odd thing to come to terms with, but that's generally how it works.
Okay, I think this is probably for the future, but are you thinking of running queen rearing courses?
At the moment, no, because I just don't have the time. I really want to get my my beekeeping kind of not my mantra, but my whole beekeeping working properly. I want to have a programmed requeening that we can do. I want to have good honey crops. I want to have the better queens, and I want a couple of years at least of doing that before I go down that road of teaching. Because the problem is,
Richard, isn't it, that you do have a gîte that you do rent out? That, you know.
Yes, I do.
We'll find a spare beekeeper. Possibly.
It's possible. Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying no, and I'll have the workshop hopefully to have the room to teach in and all that kind of thing. But it's just really on a level of professionality, you've got to look at what works for you, and you have to go where you know you can make a living from it. And in France, I don't speak that good of French. I get by, but I would have to be bringing people in, which maybe wouldn't be a bad thing, but people would come and visit and learn queen rearing. Yes, that's a possibility. It's all there as a possibility in the future. Who knows?
Okay. This is a question. So where do you get your metal pushing cages from?
My what? Sorry, my.
You know those little metal cages that you introduce the queen into?
Okay.
Have you made them or did you buy them?
The one in the video was sent to me by a friend, Zach Lamass, who was one of the guys who worked with Mike Palmer. Zach's now doing a degree in entomology. And he went and bought me a load of hardware cloth from America and mailed it to me. So I had these awesome, because I'd come back from Mike Palmer's and I had these awesome, I had one from Mike, I think he gave me. So I'll keep that one. I said, oh, where can you get this hardware cloth from? And you can't get hardware cloth like you can get in America here. But you can use other stuff. That is, I think eight little squares per inch they'd use in America. It's called hardware cloth, but you can use other things now. And you can even use a push-in plastic cage made by, I think Nico make one. There is other things on the market that are similar, but that is a metal cage from America. I cut them up, I make them myself. If you want to look at my YouTube video, there's a video on how I make my pushing cages.
Okay. What is the natural lifespan for your queens, or do you replace them on a periodic basis?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because we talked about this quite a bit, and there's quite a lot of interest in how often I replace my queens. But I'm finding that my lifespan of my queens is not as long as I'd want, and I find that by the end of the second year, they've either swarmed or I've replaced them because they're not good. They're not lasting more than 2 years. But I'm working on that to do everything I can to try and get them to last longer. So at least they get to the end of the second year, then I can requeen them then. But I can't do much about that. And you know, it's an over time thing. And I think it's to do with genetics. I think it's to do with pesticides. I think it's to do with the availability of drones. That's what gives you your longevity in queens. So they say. It's a complicated issue.
And so Alexei says, what do you think about queen right methods of queen rearing for someone for just say 10 colonies? I know you said not to bother with
queen starters and finishers. They work. Certainly a queen right finisher works. I don't use a queen right starter because I can't trust it enough. I've tried them. I don't find they work. I think you're better off by going to a group of 2 or 3 beekeepers and shaking some bees in a box and making a hopelessly queenless setup. Then you're guaranteed to get cells drawn. Okay. If you or another way that is hopelessly queenless, I don't think that a queen right one should be your first port of call if you're starting to raise queens, because it's too variable. And even the professionals don't use it. You have to go with what the majority do, and it's not the norm. Mm-hmm. It works in certain people's bees. It isn't I would say, from what I hear and what I see, it isn't a well refined method. Okay.
So someone said, wonderful, absolutely inspirational talk. Wow. Can you just, now this is the more difficult bit. Can you just clarify how you go about making the colonies draw new breed frames out?
Well, that's pretty simple. You do it when the bees do it. If you work on the, I'm just gonna have a drink, excuse me. I don't want to clear my throat because I'm going to start getting an aching throat. If you work on the principle that you get a mass buildup of bees in the spring, yeah, and a mass hatching at that between the April and May time, that's the time to build your frames. That's the time, because you're going to have bees that are young nurse bees, and then they're going to become wax builders. And if you can time it right, and if you get a big swarm, for example, and you want to build loads of frames, you just whack a big swarm in a box and feed it, and they'll draw the whole lot up, everything. That's because they're full of wax builders. And a swarm is a monster comb builder. It's what they do. But overall, if you look at the timings, the best time is April and May, when you've got your spring flow on. And even if you put one brood box on top of another and it's full of just foundation, they will build the whole lot up so quick by about May time, because they've just got this massive amount of wax builders before they become foragers. It's kind of what they do. It's, you just have to work with the bees again.
Okay. So Colin asked, after the queens have hatched in your incubator, what is your normal turnaround for adding to the mating nukes? Okay.
My main thing here is I don't want to keep my bees in the incubator, my hatch queens, for any more time than I absolutely have to. The ideal time to get your queens into the to your nukes is within 5 to 6 hours of them hatching. And I mean that rigorously. But if you have to leave them a little bit longer, you can, but absolutely no more than 2 days, because to survive for more than 2 days, you've got to really look after them. You've got to feed them honey and raw jelly. You've got to keep them watered by giving them a drop of water twice a day. In the incubator, it's a very volatile area because the air's moving with the fan. They dry out quickly. It really is like I'm saying this again. In the incubator, it's a very kind of up in the air place. You know, you can lose a lot of queens quickly if you don't get it right. But if you use it just as a hatching area and you know where they're going to hatch, you get them hatched, and the majority of time are absolutely fine. You've got 12 to 24 hours, no problem. But you just have to be aware that you've got to look after those queens and have everything ready. So once they hatch, you just take them off and put them in. You can either put them in these cages. You can put them in the Nico cages and introduce them like that with a few nurse bees or without nurse bees, and they're released in 12 to 24 hours. You can leave them in these cages, the Nico cages, and then just run them into a colony that's hopelessly queenless, and they'll accept it if they're a virgin. It's what works for you, and you've got to try it. You've got to try the methods that work for you.
Okay.
It's a good question.
There's a few people have asked the same thing. So I'll run it into one. What is your Varroa treatment? And then someone said, can you say something about using the Sublimox in winter for Varroa control, as they've just bought one?
Okay, brilliant. My Varroa treatment has always been based on my Sublimox. Mm-hmm. But in the last 5-6 years, I've been using, when I become a professional, have larger numbers, I've been using Apiary strips put in at the end of the nectar flow. And as I said, we work as hard as we can to get the honey off and get the treatments in, so we don't get that huge buildup of Varroa. And we don't raise Varroa. We don't become breeders of Varroa, you know, for our colonies. But I found myself, and I know other breeders have found the same, and I wouldn't consider myself a breeder. I'm just a queen rearer. Speaking to other breeders, and they say that the days of amatraz are finished, and we should be looking at something else. And that's why I fundamentally agree with looking at breeding Varroa-resistant queens and starting down that road, and everybody should do something to support that. But amatraz is now no longer seem to be working. It might have a slight effect, but it's not good. And how long is it going to work for? It's like an imaginary help. It might help 1 year, it might not. We can't be relying on it. So in terms of the Sublimox, I use the Sublimox. I've done a video on it, Sublimox treatment in my apiaries. You can see that if you want to go onto my YouTube channel, Richard Noel Bees, up it comes. I use the Sublimox because it's a very effective tool. It's the same tool as the Pro Vape 110 in America. It's virtually exactly the same. It just runs at 110 volts, their machine. Ours runs on 220. I have an inverter I can drive to my apiaries, unroll the extension lead. I know a lot of people are using now the GazVap, the very small, really compact device for giving oxalic acid to colonies, which I think is absolutely fantastic, but I generally don't use it because I find that when you're in an apiary with more than 10, 20 hives, it becomes a little bit awkward because everything gets so hot. With the Sublimox, it's a really nice tool. It's made really well, and you can deliver a nice 2.5 grams of oxalic acid to each colony very quickly and efficiently if you're well organized. And I believe that's the best way to do. So I do Sublimox in the autumn. I'm going to start probably next week because I believe my colonies are virtually broodless now. Certainly the small ones are. And then I'm going to do a couple of treatments because obviously you're only getting 98 to 99% of the Varroa each time. But if I get 98% of the second time, that's a pretty good hit on the Varroa. And I really want my bees clean this year because I am no longer using amatraz next year. I'm not going to have it in my hives. I'm looking at caging my queens at the end of the nectar flow next summer, so I can then use the Sublimox treatment after 24 days and then take out all my phoretic mites, because every single mite in that colony will be phoretic. And you zap them all, you release the queens, and then the queens start laying like billy-o and build your winter bees with clean bees, with no virus in them, because there's no Varroa. That's my plan. Whether it works or not, I don't know. I know these cages I'm going to use are going to be a little bit expensive, and they won't all work and I'll need spare queens and blah, blah, blah. There's always a downside. But I just feel that we are now entering a time where we can no longer rely on old-fashioned conventional pesticides, because at the end of the day, amitraz, which is the key ingredient in the Apivar strips, is an insecticide, and putting that in our hives just isn't really on anymore. We can't be continuing to do that. We might do it as a one-off treatment if we're really stuck, but we consider MAQs. A lot of people use them, and they burn.
Richard?
Sorry?
Lots more questions.
Okay, well, it's important though, the MAQs aren't the answer either. Some people say they're brilliant, but a lot of people have problems with them. They burn the queens. There's just not much around. We've got to look at other options.
Okay.
Sorry, carry on.
No. I mean, I would say at the end, when I get through all the questions, Richard has said he will loiter. So, you know, you may have a more chatting moment, which John has said. I was thinking that the potency of overwintered drones may not be great. So I'm starting my queen rearing season from when the new drones are underway. I'm working on the idea that drones are mature about day 16 after emergence. So I think he's...
Yes, about day 16 is about right, but we say 40 days from the day the queen laid the eggs into the drone cell. So if you see drone, you've probably got 16 to 20 days, work on that. But don't forget, drones can be in a colony for quite a while, and in the summer they're well fed and well looked after. So they hang around for quite a while. They don't get binned out just because they haven't done anything. They'll be around for a while if everything else is good and there's a flow running. But I do just err on that bit of caution about overwinter drones. There's very few drones that overwinter. Every colony has one or two, but it's only kind of for emergency, we think. And a lot of the research says that there's always a few that they don't bin out because they kind of genetically think we better keep a couple just in case, because it might give a queen that has to mate early because she's superseded in another colony the chance of mating. But don't rely on that. Rely on fresh queens in April and May. That's what you need.
So Ricky said, can you build cell builder in a nice box with extra boxes on top? And he's really enjoying your talk, or she.
In a nice box?
I don't know quite. In a nice box? I mean,
you mean perhaps in a new box?
A new box, yes.
They're all nice boxes, Ricky, you know. Yes, you can. And next year I will do a video on doing some queen rearing on a small scale. You just minimize everything down. If you want to raise 10 queens or 15 queens, maybe 20 queens, you can do with half the amount of bees. You just have to keep it really alive. Excuse me. And so I'm losing my voice after an hour yapping.
And more.
More like 2 hours.
Yeah.
I think I need some of the red stuff. That'll be better. But yes, you can, and it is possible on a smaller scale. But you can't go too small. You've got to keep that hopelessly queenless feeling of a colony before you can raise good queen cells. You don't want to have. I do see it often, and I have to say, you do see a lot of people trying to raise queens. They don't get the builder strong enough, and they try and put a load of queens in, and there's not enough energy, not enough nurse bees to raise the 20 cells they put in. And it's like, I can't say anything, but you should know better. You should try better than that. And it's just, unfortunately, you have to learn from your mistakes. You need lots of nurse bees.
This is a question that, you know, in some ways, I think I know the answer. You know, someone's asked, what are the benefits of having a YouTube channel? And why do you do it?
Really interesting question. And I can tell you straight away,
Okay.
it helps me. It helps me work out whether I'm doing things right or not. We discussed this. Ian Stepler discusses it as well. It gives you clarity. You're able to talk about what you do, and you get feedback, and you put it through your mind about, it's not the money. You know how much I make per month from my YouTube channel? I can tell you, I make between 160 and 200 euros a month. It's peanuts. You're almost paying by the time you've got a camera, the time you take, you're not making any money, but it's a little bit of money that you get back from adverts. And I also will say, well, I can. I have to just have a drink.
Oh dear, people are going
to do try and turn the adverts off mid-roll, okay, but it doesn't always happen. They put them back on sometimes. But it's a way of kind of expressing yourself and sharing what you think is the right thing. It's not necessarily right, but you believe it's right, and you're pretty sure it's right. We wouldn't do it otherwise, and people would soon cast you away and put you at the bottom of the heap, you know, if they believed what you did was wrong, and if you didn't follow what was the general good thing, what isn't good husbandry. If it wasn't good husbandry, people wouldn't follow you. You know,
Okay.
you've got to work in a way that's realistic, and you've got to be absolutely honest with people. And I think that's what people like. They like the honesty.
I mean, I would honestly say to anybody who hasn't seen your YouTube channels that they are very good. So I would recommend them.
Thank you very much. But all I say to that is there's different YouTubers now. There's a lot of people doing it, and they attract a different
moment now.
You find someone who you like and you follow because of their manner, the way they present, and that's the one you generally stick with. And I follow 2 or 3. I follow Ian Stepler. I follow Jason Chrisman, JC's Bees.
Okay.
I follow Bob Binney. I follow 3 or 4 really.
Okay.
I can't follow everybody because you just don't have time. You know?
Okay. So,
but it's important we do. You know?
Yeah, no, and it's really helpful to us mere mortals. So a lot of people have sort of come up with ideas how you could get these nests, you know, which I'm sure you've already thought of, like drones, shooting with a gun, with capsules.
Well, I can tell you, I know them all. They've used paint guns with pesticide, it works, but you end up putting a lot of pesticide in a tree, and it's not good for the environment because you've got a huge bolus of pesticide that takes a long time to break down. That's the negative side of that. Yes, it does work, but you can't fire a paint gun at the nest because often it's too high up and you can't even see the nest. You can use a drone. They've done films of them using drones. They have a drone that carries a parcel of permethrin. They inject that into the nest, but you've got to get the drone to the nest, and the nest is often in the crown of the tree, and you get the drone nearby, it hits a branch and the drone is lost. You know, it's not. And there's a lot of people will say, oh, just use a flamethrower. I mean, I've seen all that on the American sites, you know, and I get that all the time.
Yeah. Okay.
Believe you me, the French are very resourceful. They've looked at everything they can. You've only got to look at the work the Jersey Beekeepers Association have done. It's fantastic. They've tried everything they can as well. They've tried drones, but it's not the answer. If there was a better way, they would use it. Believe you me, there is just no realistic scenario we can use right now. We are looking all the time.
Okay. So another one is, hang on. So this is from Philippe in France. He's saying, this is a question from a French beekeeper. What do you think about Varroa mite chemical treatment and the risk of resistance versus alternative ways? Like,
well, that's why I'm going to.
That's what you said. Yeah.
That's why I'm going to be not using Varroa mite treatments anymore, apart from oxalic acid. Now, oxalic actually is an organic treatment. I know it's still a treatment, but it's about the most natural treatment you can get. The thing with oxalic acid is it works, and it's very unlikely the bees will build up resistance to it. Sorry, the mites will. So it works well, and I believe that a lot of the chemicals we've been using are just no longer working. So I don't believe it's good, and I never wanted to put chemicals in my hives in the first place, but we have no choice. If you have a treatment you can put in quickly within 10 minutes of every hive, and it's efficient and it gets rid of all your mites, you're going to use it, aren't you, if you're a professional beekeeper? But if it doesn't work anymore and you end up at the end of the season with massive mite counts and you've still paid for that treatment, you've got to look elsewhere. And that's what we're going to have to do now. We can no longer go down that road. Okay. We've got to be dynamic. We've got to remain open-minded and look for alternative measures.
So have you any views on stimulating feeding in early spring?
Yes, I used to do it every year, and I believe it's a good thing. No matter what you think about it, if they take the syrup down, it's still a feed that's gone into the colony. And I believe this is great for nucleus colonies, because nucleus colonies in the spring are like the blue touch paper. They can crash overnight. And if you give them all a spring feed as a standard supplement feed with a little bit of syrup on a warm evening, the first few evenings you get when they're just starting to fly, and they take it down, even if it's a cupful, that's going to give a little bolus of syrup into the brood nest. It won't induce swarming. It'll just give them that supplementary feed and that feeling there's a bit of nectar out there. And then if you need to give more, you can. But it stimulates that. I believe it does stimulate the queen a bit. I don't do it in my production colonies because I haven't got the resources to go and put feeders on every one of my production colony hives. It's too labor intensive, and there's so much honey in the hive anyway. I wouldn't even be doing it. But I believe for nucleus colonies and young queens, yes, definitely. You can't go wrong by doing it because they will burn everything you put in. A young queen that's prolific will be laying in February, and they will just keep laying and laying and laying. And then if you get a cold spell in April, May, and you haven't fed it anything or given it the possibility to find extra food, they will crash, and they will just, all you get is this pile of dead bees in the box. And it's the saddest sight, because you've got that queen mated the previous year, you've made that split, you've got the two united, you've got a wonderful colony, it's even made it through the winter, and then it's dead about April time. You're like, you know. So it's really a thing we do all the time anyway. But yes, I think it's a good stimulus.
Okay. Hannah asked, and this is, you know, I mean, I'm with her, you know, we're into different levels here. So what is an F1 and an F2 queen?
Right. Well, an F1 and F2 is if I went to a queen that I knew was from a pedigree, okay, and I grafted from her, and those virgin queens that I made from her offspring, her daughters, went off and mated. Those queens that mated, that returned after open mating in my yard, would be F1s, first cross. Okay. Yep. F2s would be the daughters of the daughters. Okay. F0 is a very loose term right now, and a lot of breeders don't like it, but F0 means it's two queens that were inseminated from selected pedigrees. So you know there was no variability. So you get a first cross, but it's a zero cross, because you know the definitive pedigree of that line, or that queen. We don't say lines anymore, we say queens, because queens are queens. There's no lines as such. But that's kind of how it works. And we have this joke in Brittany that the bees are so bad, they must be F20s, because they're so awful sometimes.
Okay.
But anyway, I hope that clears it up, because it's a straightforward saying.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very easily spoken about subject, isn't it? It's just quite helpful to have somebody explaining. So John de Cataract has said about in Jersey, we now use tree climbers. So we try to remove Asian hornet nests without any pesticides, which is somewhat what you're saying, the same, isn't it?
I haven't spoken to John I spoke to him about 4 months ago, and I spoke to him recently, and I knew they were changing the way they try and manage their kind of, you know, how they treat a nest. But it's not always easy with the tree climber either. Don't forget, that's a highly skilled job being a tree climber, and with an Asian hornet's nest, it's a double whammy, you know. So fair play to them. If they're doing that, brilliant, you know.
Okay, I've got 2 more questions. Okay, well, no, actually 3, because I might want to ask one.
Keep going. If you want to do 20 minutes more, that's fine.
Well, no, what I think is then we can let people go, and if they want to stay, they might want to ask you more questions. How often do you go through your 20 hives during, well, I think there are more than 20 hives during the swarm season? The 200.
Well, in the spring build-up, we want to go through them every 10 days at a maximum, every week if we can. It's not always possible, but we don't have a method of swarm control per se. Our swarm controlling is regular inspections, is requeening, as we've discussed, when we can, but it doesn't always happen. And it's our swarm control is not picking them out of the trees. All right, that's what we desperately don't want to do, but it often happens. And we do say, if there's a swarm of bees in a tree, we leave it there, because the time you waste getting that swarm into a box, and they're from swarmy genetics, you just leave it and they'll just find somewhere and die. You don't want those bees in it. But it's not really how we think, but we kind of say that but we always end up, we can't resist shaking it into a box, because it's like, it's a resource, you know, we don't want to lose it. We'll generally put it in a box, get the queen to lay, and then we'll requeen it with one of our new lines. It's very difficult to do, but we try.
Okay, so I was one question. You've never mentioned anything like, you know, European foul brood or anything like that, or any diseases.
Well, we have that. We have European foul brood as much as they do in the UK, but we deal with it. I believe we don't. I've shook swarmed a couple of colonies last year, and to be honest, I wish I'd just burned the colony, destroyed it, because I believe that the time you waste shook swarming and the frames you use, you've got to burn them. I would burn the frames anyway when I've shook swarmed them. With obviously American foul brood, we burn the colony straight away anyway, but I just believe that if you get a colony that's a tall iffy, we'll just get rid of it and requeen it. If we get a little bit of foul brood, if we get a little bit of European foul brood, and it's only on one frame, I'll remove the frame, burn that, and I'll requeen the colony. And that usually does the trick. And that's a sensible method to do. But if it's through the colony, if it's on 4 or 5 frames of the brood nest, a bit here, a bit there, it gets destroyed. I haven't got time to feather bed a weak queen or a queen that's susceptible to European foulbrood. And I advise anyone to do the same, because I believe the bee unit in the UK is doing their inspections now. The seasonal bee inspectors are finding a lot in the UK, and it's coming up all over the place all the time. And the problem is, there's a lot of unregistered beekeepers in the UK, like there is here, who don't do regular inspections, who aren't trained to a level they should be. And that's our gripe with beekeepers. We find a lot of people are these days having 1 or 2 hives, and I have no problem with that, providing they follow the proper training, and they need to maintain their hives with the correct husbandry. And it's important, because if you don't, if you have a lot of hives in a small area, guess what happens? We get it, you know? It's just unfair. It's wrong, you know? We are happy to help you. We'll teach you, but come to us, ask us, you know? Okay. It's just wrong. You can't have that pool of disease all the time. You've got to get rid of it.
Okay. So this is probably the final question that I'm going to put, and then, you know, people can leave. Paul said, leave it to the end. He said, what would be your 3 top tips or pearls of wisdom for moving from dozens of hives to hundreds?
From thousands of hives to hundreds?
No, from dozens, from 12 to...
All right, okay.
Going from hardly any to where you are. Because another question, which is similar.
Really good question, because it's one I'm experiencing now.
Yes.
I wouldn't say I'm there yet, personally. I'd say I'm nearly there, but there's a lot I want to do. The problem you have is basically logistics. And the first thing I would say is be realistic. You can't do it all in the same year. It's going to take you 3 or 4 years. The second thing is you've got to have a designated specialized workshop. The problem a lot of people have is they have hives, they extract in their garage, and they get to a point where kids are getting stung, bees are finding their way through the hallway, all this kind of stuff, you know, and you just have to have that cutoff point, you know. You can't just suddenly go from an amateur to a professional instantly. It's really, really difficult. You have to do it over time. That would be my advice. And my third thing would be, just be honest with yourself, just work hard and it will come. Just be focused. Just, if you really want to do it, you can do it, but you've got to have that, you've got to do everything you can. When I get home in the summer at 7, 8 o'clock in the evening, I'm not just stopping beekeeping then, I'm keeping going, doing other things. I often raise a batch of queens in the summer at 11 o'clock at night because I have to do it. That's the commitment you have to give. It's not a 9-to-5 job. There's a more time in the winter, yes, but we're still really busy now. You know, here we are doing other things of an evening. But that will be my 3 things. And the most important is be realistic. You know, don't ruin your life. Just become a beekeeper if it's not what you really want to do. It's got to be in ground. It's got to be your passion. It's got to be something that you're going to do because you know you're going to do it, not because you think you want to do it. You have to just anchor in there, and it will come. If you build it, they will come. That's the expression, and it will come if you build it. You just have to be realistic. Okay.
Well, I mean, and the overwhelming question that everyone's asked is, you know, how can they get this recording?
Well, I will be posting it on my YouTube channel, and if they want to watch it, I'll be absolutely flattered. So
exactly. So you know, we will stop recording this, and then I'm going to send it over to Richard, and he's going to edit it and put it on it. Well,
if that's okay.
Some way we're going to get it, but it may be a couple of weeks or so, or whatever.
Yeah, there's no time. It'll come up in the next few weeks, and maybe you can watch it Christmas Day when the TV's that.
Yeah. So
I couldn't think of better viewing.
Yeah. So everyone, I think we should thank Richard. So do you want to unmute yourself and we can give him a big clap? I mean, there's over 100 people still here. So obviously, so thank you.
Thank you.
So,
Well done. Excellent.
Well done.
Hello.
have you finished your wine?
No, I've still got half of the series. Yeah? I'm saving that for the chat after.
Okay. So everyone.
I can't interrupt. Just say thank you to everyone for that. I really appreciate that feedback. as you know, I do run my YouTube channel and I get feedback from that, and I'm generally kind of bowled over with what people's comments are. So thank you all really much. Okay, it's really good. Thank you. I'm just going to try and keep it real. That's all. It's got to be fresh, and it's got to be. I don't try and give lots of BS. It's just got to be as it is. And there's times when it's down and times when you're really up and running, and that's what it should be. But thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you. Stay well.
So,
Nice one, Richard.
Yes, you want to
Very
have a-
good.
but bye.
Bye, Sally.
Congrats
Yeah.
from sunny Derbyshire.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you very much.
thank you. Stay well.
All over the place. America, Macedonia,
Yorkshire.
Wow.
Yorkshire.
Dundee.
Derbyshire.
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 I'm honoured to get Derbyshire. Wow, that's one to cross off.
It's still
Thank
sunny
you.
here, Richard.
Oh,
Thank you.
Oh,
thank
okay.
you, Sally. Thank you.
I'm wondering whether we should like have a 5-minute break, Richard, and then so everyone can disappear if they want to or not, and then we can see how many people are left. Because it might, I might go get myself a glass of wine.
Sounds
Don't you, Jean?
Cheers.
Thank you.
I suppose in America, Michael, it's a bit early for you, isn't it? Gin at lunchtime? You're muted. He's there. Can you see him? He's
Is there the lamp in the background?
Yeah.
Hey, can you hear me now?
yeah, we can hear you now.
Hi, Mike. How
Yeah,
you doing?
I'm sitting in my car because my battery died.
Oh, Mike, I'm touched. I really am. I tell you, thank you.
Well, look, check my ground.
Holy
check
crap.
out. How would you like to live there? There you go.
I'd love to.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining, Mike. I
There's
really
no-
appreciate it.
There's no ivy bloom here.
No, no. It's ours is finished now, though. We're ready for the
Yeah.
winter.
Yeah.
So it's like, so no, you know, you're out working then. You're out, or are you in your
No,
shed?
I was working in the shop today. I had to replace some lights that failed and some overhead lights, and it's snowing. So we got about 2 or 3 more days of work, and we got to wait for a warmer day than this.
Well, it's good. So,
Yep.
anyway, so there's still 60 people here. So I don't know how we're going to do this.
I'm going to nip off for a minute and
Yeah, why
Yeah,
don't you nip off for a
fine.
bit, and then anybody who wants can nip off and come back and ask, you know, more questions, not through me. They can ask them direct. Put up your hand, and we can ask them direct.
okay, that's probably easier. I think we should do open questions if you like. That's fine by me.
Or
I'll
chat.
just have a 2 or 3 minute break and I'll be back.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Excellent.
Mike, some beautiful cook home honey that you were showing off earlier on.
Yeah, you saw that.
I did, yeah, I was watching.
Good. Yeah, good.
How,
Yeah,
how
we
many have
made
you
some-
got?
Oh, I don't know. We made a couple thousand this year, I guess.
Wow. Amazing.
Just, just cutting it up now. It's a tough year, you know. We haven't had enough help. We only had half a crew because of the COVID, and you know, so we're getting by. We're getting it done.
Good, glad to hear it.
Yeah. Well, Richard, if you can hear this, it's been great to listen to you, and you have a good day. I got to go home.
Oh, well, we're going to see you in 2 weeks, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah. Yeah. So everyone, make sure you book for Mike's talk.
yeah,
We learn about.
yeah, Leslie.
Learn it all
I'm sure Leslie's looking for me already. So
again.
we'll see y'all later.
Definitely.
Take care.
Bye, Mike.
Okay, take care. Thank you. Bye. Well, yeah, so we've got, as I keep saying to you, we have one more talk this year, which is in 2 weeks' time, December the 9th. And you can find us on Eventbrite. And it's Mike Palmer speaking about sustainable beekeeping. And I think a lot of Richard's ideas come from Mike, so it's a good follow-on too. And Richard introduced me to Mike, so it's a lovely connection. So it's good. So we're down to 54, which is great. So, you know, it's lovely. So I think If anybody's got any questions for Richard, or a general, if you put up your hand or something, because I've got my wine and I might forget the questions. I might not be ideal.
I'm back if anyone wants to fire away with some questions. That's fine. You just carry on.
Okay. Well, let me just, put up your hands, everybody, and Richard will find you. So does anybody, so there's some questions in the chat room, actually. Someone's listening in from Japan.
Fantastic.
Saying can't talk because her daughter's asleep, or his daughter's asleep. I'm starting Japanese honey beekeeping.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's exciting. And
if anyone wants to answer a question, then by all means, just fire away and we'll get there.
Okay. Well, I'll ask a question because obviously everyone's nervous. So if you were starting all over again, is there anything you might have done differently?
Probably start sooner as a professional. Okay. I just feel that if you read Manley's Beekeeping, one of the big regrets he actually has is that he didn't start being a professional beekeeper because no one kind of took him seriously until later on in life. And I can't help but feel that I may be further ahead now if I'd have started a little bit earlier. In other words, just said, I'm going to do it and not cared about it. But the problem is I have responsibilities, I have kids, I have all the rest of it. I'm kind of caught up like everyone else is, but now I'm just getting to that kind of impasse where I can operate as I do. But I would have loved to have done it sooner. That's kind of how I feel.
Okay. I think maybe we should mute it. I'm going to mute all and then unmute you and me, Richard.
Okay.
I'm going to allow you all to unmute yourself, but and you. Okay. Can you unmute yourself, Richard?
Yeah, I'm muted now. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I'm the only one allowed to speak, really.
Okay.
But do unmute yourself when you want to. Would anybody like to ask Richard a question? Oh, Simon Robbins, you do.
Simon Robbins, yeah. Fire away, Simon.
Unmute yourself, though.
Trying to unmute. Hey.
Okay.
Hello there. What makes your uncapper? That's very compact uncapper.
Yeah, it's a really good question. A lot of people ask. It's actually an Italian make, but it's sold by a French company. And a lot of people have asked me, and one kind chap on the internet did actually find it for me. I tell you, the setup is it's owned by my colleague, and he bought the whole lot as a package when he first started extracting here. So it's like, it ain't broke, don't fix it. So we've still got the old machine, but it's an Italian make. And if you want to contact me by email, I'll try and pass on the make. It's unusual because it's like what we call a vertical or horizontal capper, but it's really efficient. But if I was to buy the same piece of kit now, I would buy the all-in-one thing like everyone else has. But the problem is that there's just nothing wrong with it. Just going and you kind of use what you have, and that's how you can make your efficiencies and your savings, because if you've got it already and it works, you just use it. When you're a one-man band, I say one-man band, I do work with my colleague, we work together on things, but there's times when he can't help me, so I harvest on my own and he does his own on his own when I'm busy. So we have to have a machinery that will be available to use on your own,